A group of people was attacked by a gang hiding their faces under masks. One of the men was injured, so there was a girl next to him who was monitoring his condition. Because of this, only one person confronted the three attackers. Although the man had the ardor of a sword, he was very nervous because he was not sure that he could defeat an enemy who outnumbered him. However, a boy suddenly appeared and attacked one of the criminals, causing the masked man to lose his weapon. The masked men indignantly asked who he was anyway. It turned out that people were saved by an ordinary 8-year-old boy passing by. He helped people avoid something, perhaps irreparable. 100 years ago, 4 people gathered around a wounded man. They were all trying to help Master Edelfus, who had protected one of them. The creature nearby, whose name was Dion, tried to use magic to cure a person. The master, although he looked badly injured, tried to pretend that nothing terrible had happened so that the one he stood up for would not feel guilty. The blood did not stop flowing, which is why the creature began to worry about Edelfus. With the help of the seal, the student continued to try to get rid of the wounds on the human body. But Mather was only interested in one question: whether it was possible to revive the monster of disaster that they had defeated. One of the students only said that there could be no signs of rebirth because the master had wiped him off the face of the earth with his magic. The young man tried to distract Edelfus from the pain shooting through his entire body and said that the master had not yet taught him this magic, implying that it was too early for him to leave them. However, the man said that it was just an improvisational spell. The master added that if a guy could see this magic once, then he would be able to repeat it and use it on his own in the future. The young man didn't want to hear something like that, so he asked the man to stop. The guy who so desperately clung to every opportunity to talk to the master was called Milt. He was a magician. The young man was full of talents, had a sense of purpose, and a sincere heart. The man taught him all the magic techniques he knew himself. One of the girls present nearby is the warrior Zenobia. Although she was small and didn't like ghosts, she was able to grow up to be a warrior called the Holy Sword. The creature trying to cure the man was named Dion. He was a healer. He became so good at his skills that he was called the water god's favorite child. Another student's name was Regina. The girl was a hero. She became strong enough to justify her title, but she still often gave free rein to her emotions, so now, like everyone else, she shed tears. The master said goodbye to everyone present and said that he was proud of his students, and even without him, they would be able to cope with everything alone, because everything would be fine with them. Dion did not want to say goodbye to the master and said that they still needed him. However, the man could no longer say anything. He only thought that his students had grown up beautiful, and he was confident that they would continue to serve for the good of the world, even without his mentoring. Edelfus closed his eyes, and other people's tears dripped onto his face. He kept thinking that he was lucky, because the place where he died was blessed by his own disciples. He thought about how he had a good life. Once, in another place, the man heard voices similar to what his students told him in the last moments of his life. The voice thanked Mr. Edelfus for his hard work. Walking along the corridor, among the massive columns, the man asked the void who was talking to him and where he was. In response, the voice replied that he was a beautiful and kind goddess. The girl did not show herself to the man, but said that, being a human, Edelfus was able to defeat the monster of disaster, so she visited him to celebrate his contribution to the development of mankind and welcome him as a new god. The goddess asked if the man still had any regrets in his life. Edelfus thought about it, because it was a great honor to become a god. The man argued that he had nothing to regret for his 120 years of life, because they were beautiful. He didn't have any children, but he raised excellent students who grew up to be outstanding boys and girls. However, after thinking about it for a while, the man thought that something was keeping him in the human world. He asked the goddess if he had truly wiped out the monster of disaster that he had killed, giving his own life for it. The goddess said that the disaster monster is one of God's apostles, so it's not that easy to destroy it. The man was shocked by what he heard. Edelfus was in despair, because it meant that everything he had been striving for all his life was in vain. The girl only noted that his feat was amazing, because he was able to do so much, being just a human being. The goddess continued and said that, besides, the disaster monster would temporarily fall asleep and not disturb people, so she suggested discussing the rest when he became a god. The man could not accept what he had heard. The monster of catastrophe is the enemy of humanity. But more than that, killing him was Edelfus's only goal, which he spent his entire 120 years on. He still couldn't accept that it had survived after all, just by falling asleep. Edelphus turned to the goddess and decided to tell her his true desire. The girl was glad that the man finally paid all his attention to her. The goddess, after being addressed by a man, appeared in front of him and asked if he had decided to become a god. However, to the girl's surprise, the man really wanted to become a god, but only in order to destroy the monster of disaster. The goddess was a little taken aback and, after a pause, said that there were some restrictions. Adelphus couldn't understand what the girl was talking about, so he asked her to explain in more detail. The disaster monster is a god, or to be more precise, a former god, a fallen, cursed beast that still possesses divine power. He also retained his power befitting a fallen god. If the power of God is confronted with the same, equal to him on earth, then it simply cannot stand, which is why the gods, without directly interfering, act through the earthly inhabitants. The man remembered that one of his students, Dion, was just a favorite child of the water god. The goddess replied that Adelphus had correctly understood the essence of what she was telling him. The goddess noted that each of the master's disciples was a favorite of a certain god, so the hero Regina was the favorite of the holy goddess. The favorite child of the god of magic was Milt, and the favorite of the god of swords was Zenobia. After the goddess told about the students of Edelfuse, she smiled and noted that he himself was her favorite. The man was a little surprised by this revelation. The girl blushed a little and cleared her throat. Later, she added that it would be better for Edelfus if he was reborn not as a god, but as a human being. However, even for this, there were 3 conditions. The man asked what the conditions were. The first condition stated that, after reincarnation, a man should not commit God-defying acts. Secondly, at the end of his second life, he will have to become a full-fledged god. Adelphus agreed to both conditions. The third condition, which was more like a manifestation of parental care. The goddess wanted to warn her beloved child. Before reincarnation, a man will need to train in heaven, because without careful preparation, the monster of disaster cannot be defeated. After that, he said that if it would help him become stronger, then let everything be as it should be. The goddess, opening the gates, warned that the passage of time in heaven and on earth is different. During the time before reincarnation, a man will need to reveal all his hidden abilities. From that moment on, Edelfus spent all his time training with various gods. Time really dragged on for a very long time, which the man could not even think about before. After 100 years, there was a boy standing in one of the houses, peering intently at something. He was a descendant of a distant relative of Edelfus Worms. The boy's name was Will Worms, and he was only 8 years old. It turned out that the boy was washing the windows and talking about how he had awakened the memory of his past life last month when he turned 8. He remembered that the goddess had told him that as an apostle of the gods, he should behave with dignity. Therefore, now he is a novice of God, like the apostle the girl told him about. Will understood that if he started training now, then when the disaster monster was reborn, he would be ready to defeat it. It will also play a role that he has improved his skills in training with the gods and has been trained in many effective methods. While the boy was talking about how he had time to train and do the cleaning, the young man attacked him, saying that Will had been cleaning for too long. The guy, whose name was Danon, was a scion of the main line of the Worms family. He was 15 years old, and the young man standing next to him was 12. He was also a scion of the main line, and his name was Ivan. They didn't like Will and laughed at him. Will could not understand where the main line of the Worms family came from, because in his previous life he had no children. The boy did not respond to the attacks and only said that he would finish cleaning soon and leave. The guys are descendants of Edelfus's cousin. Apparently, this line became the main one after the death of the man, and now they boasted that they had become nobility, although they had not made any effort to do so. Danana had always disliked the way the boy looked at him. The young man always treated the boy badly, because he didn't like having someone like him around. By doing what he wanted, Danon always emphasized that Will's position in his house would never change. Both guys spared no effort to show the boy who was in charge. They were not even embarrassed by the servants, who witnessed all such scenes. One of the men who worked at the Worms house asked Mr. Danon to stop, because if he continued, Mr. Will could die from pain. However, the young man did not pay attention to the servant's words. He only ordered him not to call Will master, because this equalized the two of them, which Danon did not like very much. This guy wished Will would never exist again. However, Will himself thought that he didn't care, since Danon hadn't inflicted a single scratch on him, so that the servants wouldn't get nervous. He decided it was time to end this ritual. He decided that he would let him do what he wanted, and then he would calm down and it would all be over. After applying magical protection to the face in the area where Danon was aiming, Will pulled the body aside at the right moment. The next moment, the boy's body flew off. But this was not a consequence of what Danon was doing, but only a well-thought-out plan by Will himself, because such a performance would definitely cool the guy's ardor. Making sounds of pain, the boy acted out the scene while Danon was proud of himself and his strength, and Ivan praised his brother and said that he was great. As he left, the older brother kicked the bucket of water with which the boy was cleaning and laughed loudly. The younger brother gave the order to remove everything immediately, to which Will bowed and replied that he would do everything. The servants came up to Will, asking if the boy was okay. However, to the surprise of the servants, the boy was completely unharmed. The man who tried to stand up for Will couldn't believe his eyes and asked how this was possible. Will replied that his father had taught him combat techniques, so after such encounters with the guys, he didn't get any damage and didn't suffer much. This answer seemed to surprise the servants, but at the same time it calmed them down a little. The servants, remembering the boy's parents, realized that something like this was to be expected from a son whose parents, Mr. Klugia and Mrs. Maria, were proficient in martial arts. In order to help the boy in some way, the man asked him to leave the unfinished work for them, since the gentleman would hardly come back. The boy wanted to refuse, but he was interrupted and asked to take care of his child's health. The man was very kind and wanted Will to take care of himself without bothering with constant physical labor, so he persuaded him to rest. A moment later, someone's voice was heard nearby, calling the boy. A girl who was Will's younger sister, Saraya, appeared in the room. The girl appeared on the back of her pet, Rune. Taking his sister in his arms, the boy asked if she had behaved well, to which he received a positive response. After paying attention to the pet, Will patted him on the head and said that he was a good boy too. Will thanked the woman who always helped the boy to look after his younger sister, to which the old lady replied that she was only happy, because this girl was the daughter of Mr. Klugia and Mrs. Maria. The woman said that Mr. Klugia was such an outstanding person, as well as extremely talented in magic and good as a leader. Another girl who served in the Worms family home said that if only Mr. Klugia were their master, it would be better, but the woman abruptly interrupted her. The old lady warned that you need to be careful in your statements and watch what you say, because nothing will hide from the gentleman. The girl immediately apologized. Will just looked out the window and remembered that their parents had died 2 years ago. The boy had heard rumors that his father and uncle had been arguing for a long time about who would be the head of the house. As a result, my uncle married a girl from an influential family and took a dominant position and sent my father to a remote estate. My father died protecting the inhabitants of the territories under his control from magical monsters. After that, a grave was erected for him, on which it was written, in addition to the estate, that an outstanding leader rests in it. The children could no longer stay in that place and returned to their uncle's house. They were taken under the care of the head of the House of Worms. However, in this house, Will and Saraya are burdened with hard work, and they are not even properly fed. The boy's memories from his previous life had recently returned to him, and of course he could have run away, but he didn't want to leave his younger sister here. Will also thought about how his former students would accept him if they saw who he was. After his mentor's death, his students created the Council of Sages, which does everything to prevent monsters from returning to the human world. Will also heard that they run an organization that has more power than the king and the church. 100 years ago, the students of Edelfuss were 20 years old, so it's not surprising that they were still alive. The boy asked how he could contact the founders of the Council of Sages. The man replied that even their master couldn't do that. However, the servant said that if the children go to a school for heroes and show outstanding academic results, they may be able to join the mission. The boy did not know which school he was talking about, so the man replied that it was founded by the Council of Sages in order to educate the next generation of heroes. The old lady said that the entrance exam was, of course, very difficult, but if Mr. Will could pass it and enroll, then the school would cover all the costs, and the children could live together in a dormitory. The woman continued and talked about how, even if you don't get into the School of Heroes, you can always try to take the exams to another place, for example, to the School of Sages or Knights. The boy thought about it. According to the experience of a previous life, both the School of Sages and the School of Knights were available only to the elite, and now they are perceived as backup options. Will was roused from his reverie by a voice calling him. It turned out that the servants had heard about what the woman was telling the boy, so the man asked if the master would take the exam at the School of Heroes. Another maid said she had no doubt that the boy would be able to pass the selection. Will was a little embarrassed. He said that it was not yet a question of whether he would pass or not. First, he needed to focus and figure out if it was worth trying his hand at the exam. The boy asked if there were any age restrictions. The man replied that, as a rule, no. Although all intelligent beings belong to humanoids, life expectancy strongly depends on the race. The School of Heroes has many graduates of the schools of sages and knights, so it can include both very young students and older students. Will thought about how he could get permission from the head of the house to take the exam, because, most likely, Danon and Ivan would try to prevent him from doing so. The man hurried to reassure the boy about this. The servant said that admission only requires the consent of the applicant, even if it is a child. No one will go against the mission organization that runs the school. The organization has specifically introduced such a rule to protect against influence. The man promised that the servants would try to bring the boy the application forms so that the other gentlemen would not suspect anything. Will was a little nervous because he hadn't expected such zeal on their part. Having solved the problem, Will looked at the window, sparkling with cleanliness, and said that he had been sitting a little too late, so it was time for him to do something. The boy turned to the servants and asked them to look after his younger sister again, to which the servants agreed and asked them to rely on her. Will turned to his sister and asked her to behave appropriately. He also did not forget about their pet and asked him to also look after the little mistress. After saying goodbye to Saria and Rune, Will hurried away to attend to his other business. Going outside, the boy walked among a crowd of people and thought that they had not been fed properly at home again. Will even wanted to catch a bird for dinner so that his sister wouldn't feel hungry. Going to the corner of the next house, Will found a suitable place. The doorway was deserted and the castle walls were also nearby. Being close to the wall surrounding the castle grounds, Will wondered if he could jump high enough to jump over the fence. He had to focus his magic in his legs to do it. By jumping, the boy was able to overcome the height of the wall and remained unnoticed because the guard standing nearby at his post was asleep. Once on the other side, Will landed deftly on the ground, rolling over himself. He ran into the forest, noting that there was not a single scratch on him, which showed the result of his training with the gods. When he reached the place he was planning to go to, he saw a bird in the sky, which he had to hunt. Taking a small stone in one hand, Will concentrated, because the right amount of magic needed to be concentrated in his thumb. When the boy saw his target, he fixed it, controlling his magic so as not to miss. A moment later, Will launched a stone at a bird flying in the sky and hit the target exactly. The duck started falling down. When Will fell, he saw that the duck had been defeated, so he noted that hunting was an excellent practice of his skills. The boy imagined how his younger sister would be happy when he brought food home, because she loves poultry meat very much. However, Will was pulled out of his thoughts by someone shouting. He thought that someone nearby was fighting with someone, as the noise sounded like a fight. The sounds really indicated that there was a battle nearby. The girl sitting next to the wounded fighter was nervous and tried to help in some way, and one man with a sword stood against 3 opponents. The man was very nervous because he was not sure that he would be able to repel the attacks of the opponents, since there were several times more of them. The man turned to the girl and told her to leave him so she could leave unharmed while he stayed to deal with the attackers. However, the girl replied that if she left the team, no one would be able to cure them. The man replied that this was exactly what their rivals were trying to achieve, so he did not specifically attack them so that they would stop for a while. Will watched from the sidelines as the girl tried to reason with one of the team members, because if that was the plan of the opponents, then they wouldn't be of any use to anyone if she didn't heal anyone. The boy looked at the brave warrior and noted that he was clearly not one of those who would run away from the battlefield. However, it seemed that even with this attitude, he could not cope with 3 opponents. Apparently, all those 9 people lying nearby are the fallen companions of the man. People were calling for the girl's help to heal them, and Will was thinking about why the enemy wasn't hitting them, preventing them from escaping. However, the boy understood that it couldn't be that simple. The next moment, the girl helping her team was attacked from behind, which she couldn't dodge in any way. The man managed to run up and repel the attack, saving the frightened girl. However, everything was not going as well as we would like. The next moment, the man felt a blow on his back from one of the attackers. The man clearly didn't have time to defend himself and his team, so he could use some help. Will continued to watch as the man who remained on the battlefield tried to stay on his feet. Everything that was happening was more like a pack of wolves attacking a single bear. The man continued to persuade the girl to leave. He said that the capital was very close, so the healer should have gone and called for help, but the girl did not want to do that. The warrior convinced the healer that this was the best option for all of them, so she should run and not even look back. The girl gave up and did what she was asked to do. The man remained to protect the wounded and himself from the attacks of opponents, while the girl, in tears, rushed to run and call for help. The enemies of the team noticed that the healer ran towards the capital and decided to stop her, planning to attack from behind again. However, the man repelled another attack and asked the girl to trust him because her main goal was to get to the city. The girl felt that something was wrong and turned around. At the same moment, one of the enemies wanted to attack the warrior from behind, which the healer warned the man about. However, no one had time to do anything, because Will, tired of watching the injustice from the outside, decided to help the team and struck an opponent who wanted to attack the warrior. The man and the girl did not expect anything like this, because they did not know that there was anyone near them at all. They stared at the boy who had come to their aid. One of the opponents fell to the ground and could no longer stand up. The boy was serious because he wanted to help people who were in a difficult situation. Will said that although he did not know the essence of what was happening, but from what he saw, he decided to choose the side of those who were in the minority and help them. The man immediately asked who the boy was. However, Will did not brag and, smiling, simply replied that he was an ordinary 8-year-old child who was passing by. The boy hurried to tell the girl that she did not need to be distracted anymore, and she could continue to treat those who could no longer fight. Will assured people that they don't have to worry, because no one will be able to stop them in the near future. At the same moment, one of the opponents wanted to attack the boy, but he failed. Will deftly intercepted the attacker's arm and threw him to the ground. Will was confident in his superiority, so he said that he would not allow anyone to approach the girl. One by one, the enemies were defeated by a boy who came to the aid of people who were attacked by a whole group of bandits. The enemy leader watched his team being defeated by a little boy and couldn't believe it. In the next instant, due to the leader's distraction, Will was able to stab him in his mask. The skull mask split due to the force of the blow, and the head of the opponents even lost a tooth after Will's attack. After dealing with the leader, the boy heard the sounds of fighting from the other side. He looked at how the man was also able to successfully defeat the opponents. The warrior thanked the boy while tying up his rivals and said that he had helped him out a lot. Will only replied that he was happy to help their team. The boy did not think that he had done anything unusual, so simple words of gratitude suited him perfectly. Later, he looked at a girl healing one of the injured people. The healer looked very tired, and beads of sweat were rolling down her face, so Will suggested that the girl herself could use some treatment. However, the girl protested and refused to help. The girl saw the condition of the people who were in her team, so she did not want to waste time on herself in order to quickly heal those who had been lying on the ground for a long time. The boy decided to help again, because the healer obviously couldn't have done it alone. He asked her to provide him with this problem, to which the girl looked in surprise at how Will's palms lit up. The boy spread his arms to the sides and began to chant some kind of spell to help all the warriors injured during the battle. After casting the spell, a large seal appeared on the ground, which contained all the fallen warriors. The man and the girl watched with interest and surprise what the boy was doing, because he was very young, but already possessed such powerful skills. Will was not distracted by anything, and after a while, the same seal appeared in his eye as on Earth. The boy continued to whisper something, and the people around him burst into a light that looked like a small flame, but they were not burning, but on the contrary, filled with vitality. The healer looked at her hands and was surprised to note that she was already completely cured. Her wounds had healed and she felt much better. The warriors lying nearby still did not open their eyes, but the girl saw that they already looked much better than they had before. The man, who was also examining himself for injuries, said that what the boy had done was a miracle. His skills not only protected and helped the team, but also completely healed the wounds and all kinds of damage. The girl was still in shock from what she had seen with her own eyes. She asked the boy how he managed to heal everyone, even if he didn't touch anyone. Will said that if the girl practiced a lot, she would also succeed, and later he remembered one of his students, Dion, who also doubted himself because the healer assured her that she would never succeed. Remembering a little, Will added that he had mastered this skill from the very beginning and smiled. Later, noticing the girl's uncomprehending look at him, the boy came to his senses and asked not to take his words seriously. The man standing next to him once again noted that Will helped his entire team. In addition to this, he also cured them all, so he is their savior. The man led his monologue to offer the boy some kind of reward, thereby thanking him financially, but Will refused, saying that he did not need anything. The boy turned around and said that the team didn't have to give him anything, and then wished them a safe journey home and waved goodbye. Behind the retreating boy, the girl shouted a question about his name, because the team did not even know the name of their savior. Will did not tell his name, and, running away, shouted back that he was not worthy of such an honor. The man and the girl continued to stand in place and did not fully understand what an amazing boy they had met. After some time, Will hunted and walked back home, carrying several captured birds on his back. Later, the boy accelerated and started running because he felt that someone was chasing him. He deliberately ran faster, thinking that this would stop the pursuer, but he was mistaken. Due to the fact that the surveillance did not stop, Will stopped and ordered his pursuer to show him the eyes. There was a stirring in the bushes. Therefore, the boy dropped the prey from his back and prepared to fight back against the attacking opponent. However, to his surprise, a creature appeared in front of him that did not look intimidating or generally threatening. Will looked at his pursuer and couldn't understand why he was being chased by a slime-like creature. The slime jumped from side to side, attracting the man's attention, but the boy could not understand why this creature was following him. Later, the slime stopped in place and looked at Will. The boy was confused and thought that the creature looked like it wanted to go with him. The boy asked if the creature wanted to continue in his company, to which he received a positive nod. Will, without thinking twice, allowed the slime to be with him. The boy told the creature to hide in his clothes so that no one would see him. The slime did not resist and, having listened to the man, hid under his shirt. The boy meant a slightly different place, but did not say anything. Looking down, Will realized that his shirt now looked strange in the chest area. Perhaps someone will ask where the boy got this creature from, because even though there are several heroes in the city who walk with monsters, he was just an 8-year-old child. After returning back, Will immediately went to the stable on the territory of the Worms family because his younger sister loved to spend time there. Will was the only one who lived in a stable all the time. He was already used to it and believed that it was not such a bad place, especially since he was surrounded by pleasant neighbors. The boy went up to the horses and, stroking them, asked if they were behaving well. After some time, the younger sister came to the stable, riding on her pet and accompanied by an elderly maid who looked after the girl. Will raised his sister in his arms and asked if she was okay because she was supposed to be on vacation with her grandmother in a completely different place. The woman apologized to the boy and said that Saria just wanted to be with her brother today, so she asked him to come to the stable. Will looked at his sister and asked if it was true. The girl was a little embarrassed and looked down. Her cheeks turned red, but she decided to ask Will if she couldn't spend time with her brother. The boy thought a little and replied that it was possible. Will apologized to the old lady because his younger sister was constantly bothering her, but the woman said that it was not a burden for her to look after the girl, and tomorrow she would come again to pick her up. The girl was sad and upset by what she heard. The boy, finishing the conversation with the woman, said that he was unlikely to be in the stable at such a time next time. Later, the animals began to behave a little strangely, constantly sniffing at the boy, but he was concerned about the drooping appearance of his younger sister, so he asked her if something had happened. Sometime later, Rune began to bark loudly, as if he saw something very interesting in front of him, which scared Soraya a little. The pet squeezed between the brother and sister, sniffing the boy. Will didn't understand why the pet was acting so strangely. The creature began to move intensively under his shirt, and then it jumped out from under his clothes, which surprised the boy. Will saw that the dog had already started playing with the slime, which didn't really like what was happening. The boy said he had to hide the creature and asked the pet not to touch it. When Saria saw the slime, she was a little confused and shocked at first, but later her eyes sparkled with emotion. She really liked the creature she saw. The girl said it looked like jelly. Picking up her new friend in her arms, the girl rubbed her face against him, saying that he was very cute. The slime was happy to be treated like this. However, after Saria tried to hug her a little more tightly, she began to change shape a little. The boy was glad that his sister liked her new friend, but he told her not to tell anyone that this slime was here. The girl promised to keep their secret a secret, continuing to hug the jelly. Remembering why the boy had gone outside the walls of the city, Will suggested that his sister go out to eat, because not far from the loot there were also sandwiches from the woman looking after the girl. After some time, the younger sister thanked her brother for the delicious treat that Will had prepared on the stove, built with his own hands. The boy also thanked his sister for her help. After changing clothes, the boy said that there was a blanket in the stable, after which their pet took it and covered the girl lying on it. My brother was worried that Saria might freeze. However, the younger sister was not cold because the dog she was lying next to was very warm. The girl was sleepy, so she closed her eyes, smiling a little. Will, lying down next to his sister, asked if there was anything she was worried about. Perhaps their new father had scolded her. The boy also asked if she had behaved well in his absence. Saria hugged the blanket and looked very sad again. It turned out that she was upset that her older brother would soon leave her, because he would have to study at the academy. Will had no idea that his little sister was upset about this. He suggested that perhaps the servants had told the girl about his plans to study at the School of Heroes. The boy told Saria not to worry about it, because when he enters the academy, both she and Rune will be with him. The girl did not believe it at first and was afraid that her brother would leave her alone. However, Will dissuaded his younger sister. Hugging the girl, he said that he was interested in how well Saria would study at the academy, to which she replied that she would try her best. After lying down together for a while, Will said that it was time for Saria to go back to her grandmother, to which his younger sister promised to behave herself. 3 days later, the boy was doing his daily cleaning tasks as usual, although the servants told him that he did not have to do it all the time. As he cleaned the toilet, all he thought about was that ever since his memory of his previous life returned, he began to train even while he was cleaning. The magic power in Will's body circulated at the same time as the magic charge was applied, the opposite of the body's movement. This exercise strengthened not only muscles, but also skills in using magic power. Although Will cleaned with his bare hands, on the brother's orders for extra training, his palms were protected from any dirt. To do this, it was necessary to cover the hands with a thin magical film. It was a great practical exercise. The boy was distracted from his thoughts by some noise coming from the rooms next to the toilet. The boy turned around to better hear what the people were arguing about. It turned out that Ivan and Danon were making noise. The elder was telling someone that some action was too selfish. The younger brother added that although they were in the rescue squad, all the brothers were from the Worms family. The girl to whom the boys complained did not pay attention to their claims and replied that they could turn to the head of the family with all their complaints. Danon said that while the head of the family was away, he was in charge of the estate. The girl no longer listened to the guys and turned to the maid with a question about where Will Worms was now, to which she received an answer that he had been invited to the second floor. Footsteps could be heard near the toilet, indicating that someone was approaching it. After opening the doors, a boy sat in front of the girl, who was cleaning and clearly did not expect anyone to visit him. The girl looked at the child and asked if he was the Will Worms she was looking for. The boy got up to answer the girl properly and said that she had found the one she needed, but asked why she was looking for him. The girl bowed to Will in greeting and replied that she was a member of the rescue squad. The Hero Academy entrance exam is tomorrow, and she came to inform the boy about it. Danon cursed and did not understand why his relative, whom he disliked so much, applied for the entrance exam without even telling his brothers anything. Will only thought that his application had been successfully delivered since they had come to him. The boy asked why the girl had come to tell him the news in person, to which she replied that she always does when she expects something amiss. A member of the rescue squad looked at the guys standing behind, which made them a little nervous. The girl again did not talk to them and asked the boy to follow her faster. Will agreed and followed the girl, but Danon didn't like it. He didn't like being ignored. After the boy and the girl began to walk away, the young man decided to attack a member of the rescue team from behind, saying that she would not get away with such behavior towards him. Turning around, the girl touched the guy's fist with her index finger, after which he seemed to be electrocuted. Danon did not expect this, because no one in his house had the right to rebuff him. His face contorted into a grimace of incomprehension and pain, and Will, watching this scene, was also slightly surprised. The boy noted that the girl has excellent magic, because she was able to stop the fist with one finger. The girl looked at Danon intimidatingly and said that if he behaved like that, she would regard it as betrayal. The guy was very scared, which caused tears to flow down his face. Danon fell to the ground in fear, and Will decided to ask if he could take his younger sister to the academy with him. Passing by the servants, the girl replied that the boy could do this because both relatives and pets could stay in the academy dormitory during the exams. She also added that he can take slime. One of the worm's household servants said that she would go and bring his younger sister to the boy, for which Will barely had time to thank her. After some time, the attention of a member of the rescue team was attracted by a guy still sitting on the floor, who irritably said that he too would take the entrance exam. The girl looked at the young man and said that he did not need to be shy about doing what he would like. She bowed, expressing respect, and added that the Hero Academy is always ready to accept applications from anyone who wants to enroll and study. Already on the way to the academy, Soraya was very impressed that she was going somewhere by carriage. The girl liked the fact that she was going on a trip, and she also liked one of the horses that was supposed to carry a carriage with people in it. Soraya stared intently out the window to see something else interesting, but her older brother asked her not to lean so hard against the glass. Later, the boy was distracted from his younger sister by the voice of a girl sitting nearby who was calling him. Will looked back and saw that his pet was sniffing a member of the rescue team. The boy ordered Rune to stop doing this, as he greatly embarrassed the girl. However, she didn't mind the attention and said that everything was fine. The girl blushed slightly and covered her mouth with a scarf, and after a short pause, she asked if she could pet someone else's pet. Will cheered up and was happy to let the girl do what she wanted, because his pet obviously didn't mind being petted either. The girl was also glad, because she was allowed to pet someone else's pet who was so fond of her. A member of the rescue team said that their dog was very big, and Will decided to tell a little story about how he appeared to them. It turned out that when Rune was a puppy, he wandered into their garden on the boy's birthday, so the dog was the same age as Will, and he was still growing up. Later, the girl noticed that the boy's younger sister was staring at her intently, so she decided to ask if something had happened to Soraya Worms. The girl was looking at a member of the rescue team like that just because she wanted to know her name. Soraya decided to set an example and introduced herself to the girl, even though she already knew the name of Will's younger sister. The girl cleared her throat and apologized for not doing it sooner. She just forgot to introduce herself and couldn't find the right moment. A member of the rescue squad patted the girl on the head and replied that her name was Artie, or more formally, Artie Zenon Barling. Soraya didn't seem to be listening to what the girl was saying to her and stared at her again without taking her eyes off her. Artie was embarrassed by such close attention, and Soraya hastened to say that the girl has very beautiful hair, which is why she stared at her so much. Later, the girl also noted that Artie's eyes were very beautiful. The member of the rescue team blushed deeply, and the girl came closer to her and hugged her. Rune also seemed moved by the scene and began rubbing against the two girls. After some time, Will decided to ask the girl how she knew that his brothers were going to let him take the entrance exam. Artie replied that the person who brought them the application asked to make sure that no one prevented the boy from doing so. Will immediately realized that the man who worked at the worm's house had helped him. However, because of such kindness, which could be known to his brothers, the servants could expect some kind of payback, so the boy began to worry about the servants. Artie, seeing Will's puzzled look, hastened to assure him that he had nothing to worry about. The academy will never tell, at the request of anyone who brings the application for the exam. The boy calmed down a little after hearing this information and said that it was encouraging for him. Almost finishing her journey, Soraya looked out the window and called her brother to look at what she had seen from the window. The girl said that they had already arrived. Indeed, there was a view of a large building from the carriage window. This is the Academy of Heroes. As soon as the carriage stopped, Rune and Soraya immediately ran out and headed towards the building. The girl was delighted by how big the building turned out to be nearby. Will tried to warn his younger sister and shouted after her that she should not run so fast because she had to be careful not to fall. Artie, in turn, said she would take the company to their new dorm room. The boy and his younger sister, along with their pet, got room number 411. Artie, as promised, escorted the siblings to their new place of residence, noting that if Will could pass the entrance exam, they could stay in this room forever. After giving the keys to the boy, the girl said that later she would show them the children's room, where Will could take Soraya while he studied. The boy was surprised that there were even such places on the territory of the academy, to which Artie told him that due to the large number of students with children, the academy decided to make specially equipped rooms for the peace of mind of parents. Artie added that children also receive education in such rooms, but it is appropriate for their age. Some of the guys are younger than Soraya, and some are even older than Will himself. The boy, after listening to everything Artie said, replied that it was quite strange because the children's ages were very different, and moreover, they could exceed the age of Will himself. The girl agreed with him. Hero Academy is a place where the most talented creatures from all over the world study. Canteens, a training center, and dormitories have been set up for all of them. The academy has provided its students with the most comfortable living conditions. Now Will understood why the academy was built outside the capital. The School of Heroes also housed many buildings in its territory, being located near the capital. Realizing how he and his sister were being treated in their new place, Will decided that he had to take the exam at all costs so that he and Soraya could stay in the dorm and not know more about what happened to them in the Worm's house. Artie also took her brother and sister to the place where Soraya will be staying while Will is busy studying. The girl waved goodbye to her older brother and stayed with the tutor. It turned out that the place where Soraya will be now has servants who are also taken care of by the academy. This startled Will, to which Artie replied that it was also the responsibility of the hero school. Walking down the corridor, the girl decided to say that she had been informed about Will Worm's ignorance about how the academy was organized in general and how the entrance exams were conducted in it. The boy recalled that in his previous life there was no academy, and his family had to work all day long, so he didn't have much contact with the outside world. In his current life, his knowledge was also not very much. Walking down the hall, Artie asked the boy if he had checked his favorability level with the guardian deity, but Will did not know what it was. The girl explained that this was a technique developed by a great sage who is a member of the Council of Sages. Will still couldn't figure out who they were talking about. Artie added that the great sage is a student of Edelphus Worms, namely Milt Edelphus. When the boy heard this, he was proud of his former student because Milt was not only able to get a surname, but also developed a new technique without the help of his mentor. Will also decided to ask why Milt was called the Great Sage, and not, for example, the Great Sage. The girl replied that Edelphus Worms himself was posthumously called the Great Sage. The boy did not expect that he would have such a nickname. Later, the boy also asked who the guardian deities were. Artie answered what she was thinking when she heard about it. Every member of the human race has a guardian deity. The guardian deity is a human deity who leads an entire race. Sometimes, not only humans but also other creatures receive the protection of deities. The most famous of these exceptional cases is a member of the Purchasing Council, that is, Dion, who is the favorite of the god of water. When Will heard the name of another of his former students, he couldn't remember if he had a last name like Milt's. Perhaps it was taken from the boy's previous life. Those who are blessed by the deities are endowed with abilities corresponding to their patrons, and those who enjoy the most favor are the favorites of the gods. That is why a person whose deity is a simple human god is simple. After telling her everything the boy had asked her, they reached the room where the seal was. The room turned out to be a place where there was a device measuring the favor of the gods. Approaching the magic ball, the girl, reading a book nearby, told Will to put his hand to the crystal. The check didn't require any preparation, so Artie said she could start right away. He put his hand on the ball. Remembering who the boy really was, he recalled the gods with whom he had spent many training sessions. After being reborn, Edelphus became a boy named Will, but he was also an apostle who trained in many gods. The boy closed his eyes and was sure that many of those deities would be his guardians. Will's thoughts were interrupted by Artie's voice, which informed him that the measurement was already over and he could take his hand off the crystal. Will looked at his hands and felt nothing. Artie looked at the boy and asked if he was okay. The boy replied that everything was fine and asked what inscription appeared in the book about which deity was his patron. The girl looked at the pages of the book and began to read the text that the patron saint of Will Worms, apparently, is a simple human deity. This information surprised the boy. He obviously did not expect to hear something like this. After recovering from a slight shock, the boy looked at the girl and asked her if the human god was his only guardian, to which he received an affirmative answer. This did not suit the boy very well. Will decided to ask if there were any cases of loss of consciousness when using a measuring device, because he felt a little strange. Artie looked at the book and thought for a while, but replied that, as far as she knew, there had never been such cases. Will was a little upset, because he had practiced with the gods for so long before he was reborn, so he was sure that they all liked him. They were always so friendly with him, but none of them wanted to be his patron. It was hard for the boy to believe in this fact. 10 seconds later, Artie asked the boy to put his hand on the crystal again, while she kept her palm on one of the pages of the book. Will did what the girl asked him to do. He was calmer this time, but he still closed his eyes for a while. After some time, the boy opened his eyes and realized that he was in a completely different place. Will looked around. The room he found himself in was large, with tall columns surrounding it both in front and behind. Looking up, Will assumed that he was in the world of the gods. When she saw the boy, a girl came up to him from behind and asked what had happened. It turned out that the girl was the same goddess who met the boy before his rebirth. The goddess asked if this boy was really Edel, to which he replied that in the current situation he was Will. Later, the couple was approached by other gods who found out that Edelphus was with them again. They came over to greet the boy, which annoyed the goddess. The gods made a lot of noise, asking the boy why he was here. Someone assumed that he had already died a second time and therefore returned to the gods again, but the boy said that he was alive and now bears a different name. The goddess tried to wake up all the gods who came up to the boy and asked Will what had happened to him in the first place. The boy asked if they had been watching his actions lately. One by one, the gods began to say that they were really watching what Will was doing in the human world. After no one paid attention to the goddess's actions aimed at calming everyone, she got angry and said it was pissing her off. After her words, the girl used a spell to silence everyone, after which all the gods could not say anything and only mumbled in confusion. The goddess asked the boy how he got to the gods, to which Will did not know what to answer. Later, all the gods left, leaving Will alone with the goddess. They were sitting next to each other, and the girl asked again how the boy got here, but he himself did not know the answer to this question. For the gods, people are like small ants. Even if you start feeding an insect on a whim, it will not mean that the god has become interested in it. It often happens that God is not interested in human life, even if his beloved child lives in the human world. The goddess, still waiting for an answer from the boy, looked at him and realized that he wasn't going to answer, because he looked like he was thinking about something else. Deciding to change the subject, the goddess asked if Will really liked living alone. The boy replied that he sometimes wonders how different the world of people is from the world in which the girl herself lives. The goddess closed her eyes and said that, as Will himself said, their worlds were very different from each other. The girl decided to ask the boy how he was doing after his rebirth, to which Will replied that he was fine. Will also decided to ask a question that interested him, and asked what would have happened if he had died before his memory of his previous life returned to him. The goddess replied that such a thing could never happen. The boy was surprised by this answer and looked questioningly at the girl. A few moments later, Inugami, who was the god of dogs, approached the boy and the girl. God said that Luxanus was always looking out for Will. The boy looked at the deity and asked who Luxanus was and how he could keep an eye on him. It turned out that the pet of the boy and his younger sister Rune is the divine child of Luxanus. Will was surprised, because he always thought that his dog was the most ordinary. Inugam replied that he was a deity named Luxanus, and it was he who sent his child to Earth when Will Worms was born. The goddess immediately added that she had asked the deity to do this. God revealed that Rune has no memories of the divine world, because he was sent to Earth when he was still a puppy, but he has the same magical power as Luxanus himself. His mission is to always help and protect Will. The boy also noted that his pet looked more like a friend than a guard, because he is very smart, kind, and also takes great care of his younger sister. Inugami smiled. The deity understood that his child was indeed a very friendly creature. The god stroked the boy's head and noted that he knew how Rune got along with Will. Later, Luxanus said that he was also very happy to meet the boy personally. The god of dogs also said that although the boy did not remember this, it was he who named the child of Luxanus Rune. Will really didn't remember that day. Inugami said that it was true, because when the puppy first met the child, the boy immediately called him by that name, so they left him like that. The conversation was interrupted by another goddess, who called out to the boy and said that she, too, was sending her child to the human world. Will turned around and saw the slime goddess on the ground, who added that he really looked very cute. The boy remembered that after the hunt, he was actually joined by a goddess-like creature, which his younger sister later began to play with. The slime goddess said that Soraya is much better at choosing names than her older brother. Will didn't quite understand what the gods meant, so he just thanked them. The deities, in turn, thought that the boy was a bit silly. Later, Will thought about it and asked the gods if it turned out that their children living in the human world also have their own divine powers. Luxanis replied that it wasn't quite that simple. There are mere mortals, or children, and demigods. Like Inugami, each deity's children are ordinary dogs, but there are also demigods who are under the protection of guardians and possess magic. It turns out that both Rune, and the slime, which was called Fury, Puri, were demigods with unusual abilities. The goddess, who was waiting for the dog god to finish, asked how much longer he would chat. The girl also wanted to ask the boy questions, but Luxanis said he wasn't done yet. The goddess wanted to ask how the boy had lived in recent years, but she didn't have time to ask anything because Will began to become transparent, which surprised the girl. The boy apologized and realized that his time in the world of the gods was probably over. The dog god said that he would always look out for Will, and the slime goddess added that Fury would also be by his side and his sister. The boy thanked everyone for their concern. The goddess tried to say something, but there wasn't much time. The girl wanted to tell some information about Will's human life and his future as a deity. However, the girl didn't have time to say anything. Will looked up and wondered what the goddess wanted to tell him. Noticing someone else's gaze on him, the boy turned around and saw Artie looking at him, who clearly wanted to tell him something too. Deciding to dump all the information about exams and other small things on the boy, Artie also added that in order to learn her specialty and take measures to pass the exam, it is necessary to conduct an inspection in the temple. After the girl told the boy so many things, she asked him if he understood everything. Will looked at the girl and didn't know what to say to her. Later, he decided to just thank Artie and said that he would do everything in his power to successfully pass the exam. The girl was glad of this attitude. As he left the room, Will decided to ask if he could find out in advance what the content of the entrance exams was. Artie replied that it would be divided into written and practical parts. The girl continued and added that there are several types of practical exams. If the boy scores high, he can be sure that he has passed it. Those who have received the blessing from the deity are considered more fortunate. Will asked Artie if she had a guardian deity herself. The girl replied that her guardian was the god of the sword. Will remembered this god, who was a strong man. The boy also noted that despite her young age, the girl was already a member of the rescue squad. However, Artie said that although it was true, her position was an assistant, because she had recently passed the tests to join the squad. As the couple walked and talked, it turned out that they were being watched by the gods, whom he had unwittingly visited only recently. Will asked how Artie had achieved such success, to which she replied that she had trained hard and really wanted to join the squad. The god of the sword, watching over Will, could not understand why the boy did not trust his mentors. The other god also demanded that he return and explain himself to them. The goddess couldn't help in any way, because she didn't think that he would come back so quickly and she wouldn't have time to tell him anything. The flame god asked everyone to calm down. The deity turned to the god of lies, because it was his child who created the device with which the problem arose. That was why Will was wary of all the deities now. The genie, the god of lies, defended his child and said that the device was not so bad. The problem was that the human race simply did not know about the existence of the apostles, so the gods were powerless in this situation. Another god asked why this device could not measure their strength and clarified who the apostles were. The flame god even doubted for a moment if it was true that he was talking to a deity like himself right now. Recently, only the dog god explained the difference between children and demigods. The man, remembering the explanation, seemed to understand what it was about. However, God still didn't understand the connection between them and Will. The flame god seemed to become very angry and tried to explain everything again. Will, who was reborn after a deal with God, is an unusual child. God asked if he was branded a divine prisoner, and was he the same as Rune and Fury. The god of flame said that he was the child of the supreme god and the guardian princess, and the apostle was a demigod with magical powers. Will, who had received God's blessing, was now a messenger of God. The man decided to clarify that, it turns out, the apostles are demigod beasts, and Will is one of the apostles, since he has the same magic as the demigod guardians. But the god of flame interrupted him and said that he had confused everything again. The god of flame said that they were talking about a device designed for mortals and that she simply couldn't measure the power of a god. After thinking for a while, the man said that everything was clear to him, but the god of flame did not believe this, and was sure that the deity had not understood anything again. Looking at the boy again, the man, who turned out to be the god of war, said that he did not think that Will would have any problems, because he, after all, was his disciple. Other deities noted that this would happen, because the boy was also a disciple of the god of flame, the god of lies, and the god of the sword. The goddess was arguing with another deity about how Will needed to send another demigod beast to help. The god of flame noted that there could only be problems with such guardianship from the guardians. After all the conversations and checks, Will returned for his younger sister, who was playing with a doll nearby the other children. The older brother waved to the girl so that she could see him, and Saria was immediately glad that the boy had already returned to pick her up. The girl waved to her older brother, but behind her, a boy playing with a friend ran past and accidentally touched Saria. The girl was badly hurt and began to rub her head in pain. Saria was looking at the floor. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She was upset because she was in pain, so she didn't even notice how a vase started falling from the pedestal onto her. Artie, seeing this, wanted to warn the girl so that she could dodge the falling object, but before she could say a word, Will was already running. Artie barely had time to blink as the vase shattered, but there was no one in the place where the girl had been. Only toys lay under the fragments of the object. Artie couldn't believe her eyes. It all happened so fast. She could barely see how the older brother picked up the younger sister in his arms and moved her to another place. Artie watched as the girl who was looking after the children was already running towards her brother and sister. She couldn't understand how such a distance could be covered in such a short period of time, and even with a girl in her arms. The member of the rescue team did not even have time to notice how the boy rushed to help his younger sister, and Will exhaled, making sure that Saria was all right. The girl apologized for breaking a vase because of her, and the boy who accidentally pushed Saria cried and also asked everyone for forgiveness. Artie tried to help calm the children down and told them not to worry, as nothing terrible had happened. Artie was standing in front of a huge door and couldn't move to enter. She put her hand on the scabbard of her sword and continued to stand there. Suddenly, the doors lit up and began to open. Artie was surprised and continued to stand. An unexpected voice told the girl to go inside. Artie went inside the room and informed the girl that she had just returned. The girl heard her. This girl was a member of the Council of Swordsmen named Zenobia Edel Baring. She continued to look at the documents, and magic power oozed out of her finger. The girl asked Artie about how everything went and whether Will Worm was able to prove himself. Artie replied that his behavior was not at all like an 8-year-old child. He is wise enough for his age, and his strength is great enough. Zenobia Edel Baring started to get up from her desk and, closing her eyes, said that she understood everything. Then the girl started circling around her desk and thinking hard about something. She was very interested. She put her hand to her chin to think well. Artie stood nearby and watched it carefully. Then Zenobia Edel Baring interrupted Artie's thoughts and said that, however, the only guardian deity of Will Worms is the human god. Zenobia Edel Baring continued to think in silence and then looked at Artie and asked if she was really telling the truth. Artie agreed. Zenobia Edel Baring continued to ponder. Then she raised her head up and said that she was very curious about why this was the case. Artie didn't understand what Zenobia Edel Baring was talking about, so she asked her about it. Zenobia Edel Baring replied that there was nothing like that, and then asked Artie if she had anything else. Artie thought about it and put her hand to her chin. She wondered if she had anything else, but she couldn't figure out what that phrase meant. She looked at Zenobia Edel Baring and wondered what the girl was up to and if she wanted to talk. Zenobia Edel Baring was sweating profusely. Zenobia Edel Baring then put her hands on Artie's shoulders and exhaled. She asked Artie to listen to her. The girl said she did not want to question Artie, but asked if she had noticed any changes in Will, for example, in his behavior. She said maybe he was acting unnaturally. Artie looked away and said that he had asked her if there had been a case of loss of consciousness while using a measuring device. Zenobia Edel Baring thought about the girl's words. Zenobia Edel Baring began to think again about what the young man meant. She realized that she urgently needed to consult with Milt. Zenobia Edel Baring said that if Will's guardian deity is just a god, then it's unlikely he has any abilities or magic. Zenobia Edel Baring asked Artie what she thought about it. Artie recalled some points and said absolutely clearly that Will has an innate talent. Zenobia Edel Baring was surprised. She said that if that was the case, Artie should continue to keep an eye on Will. Artie replied that she understood. At that moment, Zenobia Edelbaring took out one of the wooden swords. The girl swung and stopped in the air. Artie even felt a powerful gust of wind. Zenobia Edelbaring asked Artie if there was anything else she wanted to ask. Artie asked why the girl told her to bring Will worms. Zenobia Edelbaring was surprised and asked Artie if she really understood why they were doing this. She replies that they must not allow riots. Then Zenobia Edelbaring realized something and, looking at Artie, said that it was not very convincing. Artie replied that she was very sorry. Zenobia Edelbaring stopped her and said that everything was fine and the girl had the right to think so. Suddenly, Artie starts talking about Will Worms and the disaster monster. She asked if it had anything to do with Tenebris. Zenobia Edelbaring was shocked by Artie's words. Artie said that Zenobia Edelbaring told her to keep an eye on Will last time. She asked if it had anything to do with the disaster monster. She went on to say that she thinks sabotage is what Tenebris is really afraid of. Zenobia Edelbaring stopped the girl and called her name. She looked at Artie and asked her why she decided that. Artie stopped talking and looked at the floor. Then the girl clearly said that they, the Salvation Army, were an organization created to fight cults. She thinks it's reasonable that these thoughts are coming to her, since Zenobia Edelbaring told her to keep an eye on this boy. If he really has something to do with the gods, then the cult will consider him a threat and try to destroy him. Now she understands why it bothers her so much. Artie was tense, but she asked Zenobia Edelbaring about who Will really was. Zenobia Edelbaring called the girl's name and then suddenly moved closer to her face. Zenobia Edelbaring patted Artie on the head and said that she was very quick-witted and could immediately grasp the essence of their mission. She turned away and said that there were some reasons why she couldn't tell Artie anything yet, but she would be able to find out for herself soon. Artie tensed, but agreed with the girl. Then she said goodbye and left the room with apologies. Zenobia Edelbaring put down her wooden sword and thought that the monster of the catastrophe could just be called a Tenebris. A cult is a secret community that fanatically supports the beast of disaster, or, as it is also called, the god of disasters. They are convinced that they will be able to resurrect the beast and become the strongest race, and perhaps this will happen soon. Zenobia Edelbaring believes that it is necessary to hurry to assemble an army of talented warriors and people who can resist the beast. She takes out a package that measures a person's magical power. It is attached together with the application for admission. She created it to quickly find the people she needed, but almost no one met the right requirements. However, Will Worms met these requirements, but the girl does not understand who he is. At this time, Will is sitting in the room and sighing heavily. He thinks that the number of guardian deities is not included in the entrance exam results. Artie said that if the guardian deity becomes one with a human, then he loses concentration. If he fails, he can safely return to his hometown and continue his peaceful life. He should have enough money for maintenance and food to get Soraya back on her feet. Soraya asks her brother about what happened and if he might be hungry. Will is surprised. He agrees and says he's a little hungry right now. Soraya tells her brother that she will give him food. She handed him a piece of dried meat and tells him to eat. Will realized that she was giving him the jerky he had received from his vassals. When they lived in the city, they didn't have decent food. Therefore, sometimes the vassals shared with them. Soraya saved a piece of dried meat because she knows what hunger is and was afraid. Will asked Soraya if she was hungry, but the girl said no. She added that she had a bite to eat, but suddenly there was a rumbling in her stomach. Will thanked his sister for the meat. Soraya smiled. Will took a bite of the meat and told her it was delicious. She was very happy about it. He wanted to tell the girl something and said that there was a lot of food in the kitchen. Soraya was surprised. Will also said that she can take it whenever she wants. This made her even more surprised. Will told Soraya that she shouldn't keep food in her pocket anymore, and he knows it wasn't easy for her. Soraya smiled and said that she was fine because he was always with Soraya. He thought about how now they wouldn't have to starve anymore, and also worry about Soraya. He told her to go to the kitchen and eat. She still couldn't get over the shock. Later, Soraya was eating delicious food in the kitchen. She didn't believe that she could eat this delicious food, but Will told her that she could eat as much as she wanted. However, if she eats a lot, she will become as strong and fast as her brother. Soraya started eating the food. She was very tasty. He wiped her mouth with a napkin and asked her to eat more slowly. Later, Will looked around. He realized that there were almost no people. He didn't understand if there weren't any students left here at all, or if they were on field exercises. He thought about the fact that he had signed up too, and there were some suspicions. He turns to Soraya with a request to ask her something. She looks at him attentively, without letting the spoon out of her mouth. He asks about what happened after he got here. Soraya thought her brother was worried. Will replied that everything was fine. He also said that sometimes he hears some sounds that make him uneasy and asks if Soraya can talk about it. Soraya replies that everything is fine with her and nothing will happen if she tells. Will praised the girl. She hugs the slime, smiles, and says that yes, she did well. Suddenly, Will decides to name the slime and calls it Fury. Soraya was surprised. Will stroked the slime, and it smiled at him. He looked at her and realized that he must be very happy. Although Soraya had called him Fury before, and he had gotten used to that name himself, he wanted to say that now it was official, and he had his own name. He said that he shouldn't confuse his name anymore, otherwise he forgets about it every time. But he also thought that there was nothing wrong with it. Soraya called out to her brother. Soraya started hugging Fury and saying his name many times. Will said that the girl called him that, so he had already forgotten. Will realized that Fury also liked his name and was thinking about its features. He also understands everything that he wants to say. Now he has definitely decided that the slime will be called Fury. Fury. All three of them were rejoicing and looked happy. After some time in the dorm of the school, Will says that he is ready. Soraya wishes him luck, but suddenly there is a knock on the door. Artie asked Will's permission to enter his room. He replied positively. Artie's cheeks were red when she opened the door and entered the room. She asked another question. Is Will ready to go out? Artie was standing in front of Will. They were discussing her accompanying Will to the exam. He was worried that he might distract her from important things. She replied that she was completely free today. Artie was being licked by a big white dog named Rune, and then she had a slug on her shoulder. Will wondered if she could instruct him as an assistant or if she was allowed to accompany him to the exam. There was a slug on Artie's shoulder, and she was poking at it with her finger. Then she asked if Will would take the Rune exam, the Rune and the slug. Will replied that the slug's name was Fury, which was his official name now. Will was pointing to the side, and Fury was next to him. Artie said that she wanted to ask Will to take the animals with him if possible, and Will agreed to her request. Will looked at Soraya. She felt his gaze on her and blushed and called his name. Will thought that he had never left her alone before. He hoped that nothing would happen in his absence. Will squatted down in front of Soraya and asked if he could take the animals with him, as well as if she could be alone in his absence. Soraya blushed and enthusiastically said that she would be able to sit alone for a while. Will patted Soraya on the head and said that he was grateful to her for this, and when he returned, they would definitely go to dinner together. She agreed to Will's proposal. Fury was sitting on Will's head, Soraya was holding Artie's hand, and Artie was stroking Rune's muzzle. Artie said she would take Soraya to the nursery first, and then they had to go to the entrance exam. Will, Artie, and Rune were standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by a lot of people. Artie said that Will's exam would be held here and wished him luck. He thanked her for accompanying him. Will waved goodbye to Artie. Behind him were two dark-haired guys, Danon and Ivan, who were watching Will, next to whom Artie was sitting. According to the guys, Will and Artie behaved arrogantly. Danon approached Will. He stretched out his hand to him and started shouting that how dare Will ignore them. Rune was standing behind Will. He felt threatened and started growling. The surrounding people began to be attracted by the cry of the guys that Will had the courage to disobey the legitimate heir of the Worm's family. The surrounding people began to discuss among themselves the origin of the dark-haired guys who were heirs from rich families. Danon heard people talking and laughed angrily. Will looked at the man in the hat who said that these guys from noble families each have 4 guardian deities. Will frowned and thought that he had no idea who these guys were or what they wanted from him. Danon angrily said that he hoped Will wouldn't run away, otherwise it would be very sad to end up like this. It would hurt him if Will chickened out. Will tried to calm the growling Rune. Will said that Rune could harm the guys. Rune grinned and continued to growl more and more. Will was standing with his back to the guys. One of them asked if Will was listening to what was being said to him. Will's eyes lit up with rage. He stood half sideways and asked the guys if the guys really thought he was a coward. The guys tensed a little at the words they heard. Will turned completely around and started shouting that how dare the guys call him a coward. The guys are stupid and ill-mannered. They should shut up and no longer disgrace their last name. The guys jumped back. They were scared. Danin was angry and started threatening Will. Ivan told him to calm down. Ivan approached Will and asked that Will also have a divine guardian like them. Will didn't understand what that could mean. Ivan came even closer to Will and said that if Will's deity could compete with their deities, the guys had 4 of them. There was a crowd of people standing behind Will, one of whom said that the information about the 4 guardians turned out to be true after all, but it was obvious that the guys were from the Worms family. Ivan approached Will and said that maybe Will would answer them anyway. Will closed his eyes. He was ready to start talking. The boys put their hands on their belts and stood there for a while, and Will continued to remain silent. After a while, a malicious smile appeared on the faces of the guys. Danon put his hand to his ear. He looked away and said that he still couldn't hear anything from Will. Ivan stood next to him and said that he was ready to repeat the question again so that Will would answer it anyway. Will sighed. Will stood in front of the guys and said that unless he had already answered their question, it seemed that the guys had hearing problems. The guys were stunned by Will's response. One of the guys started insulting Will's mother loudly and said he should leave town as soon as possible. Will was furious at what he heard. Will took his hand behind his back. He still stood there and was silent. Danon went on to say that Will is so afraid of being out that he can't even move. Will's face is filled with anger. He abruptly pulls his hand out from behind his back and raises it up. This scared Danon very much. He covered himself with his hand and jumped back. Will threw the glove right in Danon's face, who screamed in fright. Will then said that he would never forgive him for insulting his mother. The guy was covering his face with his hand. Danon held Will's glove in his hands and asked angrily that Will was really challenging him to a duel. Will asked a counter-question that Danon was afraid of some 8-year-old child with one deity. Ivan asked Will to repeat his words. Will then throws a second glove at his face. Will said that Ivan's actions were too predictable. Ivan began to shake with fear. Will raised his hand and said that the guys only know how to talk, which is why Will challenged them to a duel. The guys got really angry. They insulted Will. Danon had an idea in an instant. An evil smile appeared on his face. He said that since Will had given them a choice, it was time for them to fight. Will was surprised to hear the words. Danon made a sly expression and said that if Will lost, he would have to fulfill Danon's wish. Will, having not heard what desire, agreed with Danon's proposal. Danon was surprised by Will's quick response. Ivan started shouting that, how can Will be calm? He will be easily defeated. Will lowered his head and closed his eyes, scratching his head with his hand. Will thought that Ivan was wrong. Will was confident in his abilities. Will raised his hand and pointed at himself. He said that now it was his turn to set conditions. If Will won, the boys would visit his mother's grave and ask her for forgiveness for saying insults to her. The boys listened to him in silence. The next moment, Ivan threw back his head. He couldn't help but laugh. Danon snidely replied to Will that he had no chance of winning, even if heaven and earth changed places. Will folded his arms across his chest, and the boys turned around when they heard the stranger. The stranger said that the guys should start the duel. If they intend to drag on, they may not make it to the written exam. The stranger turned out to be an adult man. He had a small hat on his head and a scarf tied around his neck. He said that students are forbidden to have duels without permission. The guys looked at the man suspiciously. Will looked at the man and said that he was not a student. The man replied that this rule applies to both candidates and students, so Will is also one of the people who should obey this rule. The Vormus family members said they were surprised by Will's fearless behavior, who wasn't even afraid of their threats. Will closed his eyes, ignoring the boy's words. The man raised his finger up and said that since Will was not afraid of anyone or anything, then this man would become his duelist. The guys looked at the man in surprise. The man opened one eye and said that he also wanted to participate in this. One of the guys asked the man what they would do with the written exam in that case. Will continued to ignore the people around him. The man replied that it was getting late. The written exam could wait. Will remembered his mother's appearance and thought that he would not be able to write the exam until he defended his late mother's honor. Will looked at the people around him and thought that if he entered the academy, then no family would be able to threaten him anymore, and after this duel, he would repay all his debts. The surrounding guys were also willing to be late for the exam to see the battle. Will was walking towards the Vormus family, with Rune and the rest of the people walking behind him. Will looked straight ahead and was ready to defeat anyone. A man stood between Will and the Vormus family. They were in a room with a high ceiling in which he could be seen. The ceiling was supported by large columns. The man said that this was the place for their duel. They could start a fight. The guys are standing in an arena divided by sectors. A large crowd of people surrounded the arena. The man said that if Will wins, then the guys apologize to his late mother, and if the guys, then Will leave the arena and admit defeat. Will closed his eyes and lowered his hands to his belt, agreeing with the man's words. Danon smiled maliciously and suggested starting a fight. Ivan clasped his hands on his chest and waited for the start of the match. The man looked at Will and said that it wasn't fair that if the Vormus family lost, they wouldn't lose anything. Will, without turning to the man, replied that he was not against this outcome of events, so everything was fine. A rook with a fury on his head was sitting on the podium between a girl in a raincoat and a guy in a protective suit. The man asked if Will could handle it, because there were two guys and he was alone. Will replied that he could handle it, and he wasn't alone either. The man with the hat on his head asked Danon if they could fight fairly, since Will was alone after all. Danon exhaled and replied that they constantly offend the weak, so they would deal with Will even faster. Danon twisted his face and stuck out his tongue. He thought that he would instantly deal with Will and not even have time to blink an eye. The man replied that, well, since all parties agree to the terms and are ready for a duel, then it's worth starting. The Vormus family's guys crouched down a bit, taking up fighting poses. They were ready to start the battle. Will stood in front of them, completely calm and confident of his victory. The man turned around, waved his hand, and said he hoped the fight would be quick. The guys started doing various hand swings in a half-crouch. Will stood motionless, his hands on his waist, and the whistling sound of Will could be heard. Danon looked at Will nervously and asked what he was doing. Will ignored Danon's words and thought that Danon was annoying him because he was too noisy. Will said that he had warned the guys before the fight that he would let them attack him first. The guys started calling Will names. They started doing magic and rushed into battle. The guys began to conjure, and magic symbols appeared in front of them. Danon said that Will needs to prepare to experience their full power. Will's legs shone with magical energy. He thought that the guys actually had power. A big explosion appears in front of the audience, and a dust cloud envelops the entire venue. The dust cloud gradually dissipates, and the audience is enraptured by Danon's strength. Danon spread his arms to the side and said that, as he said, his strength could not be defeated. Will gets behind Danon. He said that Danon is overconfident. In a moment, Will is next to Danon and grabs him by the neck, and Will practices a grappling technique on him. Will holds Danon's hand with one hand and holds his neck with the other. Will is sitting astride Danon. He started screaming in pain and shaking his legs. Ivan stood nearby and began to call his brother in a panic. Ivan began to conjure and magic symbols appeared in front of him. He asked to call Will bad names. Will turned to Ivan and said that if he used magic now, he would hurt Danon too. Will squeezed Danon's hand, and Danon started screaming. Ivan said that Will was really just afraid of him. Will asked Ivan what made him think that Will was afraid at all. Danon was lying on the ground with tears streaming from his eyes. He thought that Will had grabbed him so hard that he couldn't even move. Will was still holding Danon by the neck. Will asked that Danon wasn't as confident as he used to be. Will was riding Danon and holding him. He said that Will could easily defeat Danon, but he likes to torture him. Danon is crying for mercy. Ivan stood nearby and said that Will needed to stop. They were giving up. The man waved his head. Will closed his eyes and sighed. Then he released Danon, who lay motionless in the arena, only groaning softly. Will looked at Danon and said that there was no point in continuing the fight with Danon. Danon was shaking his arms and legs while lying in the arena. He started crying and screaming. Will stood next to him and said that he was ready to give the guys some time to recover, and then they could try to attack again, but only honestly. The Vormus family's guys were already standing nearby and making ridiculous movements to prepare for the activation of magic. Will looked at them and thought that he needed to finish the fight as soon as possible, otherwise, at this rate, he might not make it to the exam. The Vormus family's guys started talking. They were ready to attack Will again. Will looked at them and thought that now he was sure that this fight needed to be over as soon as possible. The children of the Vormus family began to make various movements with their hands and cast spells. The guys who were watching the battle felt the magic that Danon and Ivan were conjuring, and the atmosphere began to frighten others. A gloomy atmosphere arose around Danon and Ivan, and many magically conjured insects appeared. Will stood and looked at the dark cloud coming at him. He thought that the guys had used black magic. The audience in the stands did not understand what was happening. The guys started making different movements with their hands again and asked Will if he was ready to continue the fight. Will looked at them and thought that the magic of the guys was very strong, so he needed to attack immediately. Will took his hand aside and thought that he would definitely find a way to defeat them. The guys started using black magic in the future. Someone might have questions about this to the guys. A glowing magic ball appeared in Will's hand. He looked at the guys and said that they were not a problem for him at all. Danon clenched his fist and smiled maliciously. Then he asked if Will could do anything at all with his weakest magic. Will swung and threw the magic bunk into the dark cloud that the guys had conjured with black magic earlier. Will reached up and said he needed a little more time. Then he cast a spell, and a bright flash of magic lights up the arena. Will looked up and smiled. He said that this ability is the absorption of insects and their incineration. Danon and Ivan, when they saw Will's magic, were very angry, and they were also surprised that it was possible to destroy magic with one move that Will made. The Vormus family guys started doing magic. A magical whirlwind sprang from Danon's hand, and Ivan conjured sharp stones that moved towards Will. Will stood and thought that the forces of the earth and the wind that the guys had activated were quite strong. Will started jumping and dodging the guys' magical attacks. Danon and Ivan began to get nervous. As Will was not overtaken by any of their attacks, they talked about the future plan of what to do to defeat Will. Will began to reflect that he had a few questions about the magical deities of the guys. What exactly made these gods choose the guys? Ivan owned the god of insects and earth, Danon the god of wind and earth. The grown men watched the duel and discussed that Will was deftly coping with two opponents. A little more, and the fight would be over, as the guys had almost no magic left to continue the fight. The man looked at mine and thought that, in his opinion, the outcome of the battle was already a foregone conclusion. A girl came up to him and asked if the man could tell him how Will's fight was going. Ari stood in front of the man and adjusted her scarf. The man recognized her. Will dodged and jumped up. Danon stretched out his arm and threw magic punches. The man replied that, why was Ari asking? Because she already sees everything with her own eyes. Will's entire body was glowing with magical energy. He was focused on the battle. The man told Ari that Will had used a magical attack to strengthen the physical circulation of magic, as a child can do magic so skillfully. The man recalled Will's first capture on Danon and said that he maneuvered and, having dodged an attacking blow, knocked down the opponent. It takes years of practice to implement such a blow, and Will did it with amazing ease. The man in the hat opened one eye and said that with the strength that Will has, he can easily defeat not only a human, but also a large beast. Ari looked at the man and listened to him in silence. Ari remembered how Will saved Soraya. She said that during Soraya's rescue, he reacted instantly and wasn't even hurt. The man noticed that Ari noticed Will's improved skills even without his stories. Ari turned away from the man and said she needed to leave for a while. The man looked at her and said that wasn't Ari interested in watching the end of the fight and finding out who would win in the end. The winded children of the Vormus family could not catch their breath. They had completely run out of strength. Will stood in front of them as if nothing had happened. The man noticed that it seemed the fight was already over. Will looked at Danon and asked that their guardians were already exhausted and would no longer fight. Danon was angry when he heard Will's words. Will started using magic. His hand started to emit light. He said that, in his opinion, now is the right time to end the fight. Clumps of magical energy rose above Will's hand. Will spread his arms to the side and two large spherical clumps of magic appeared above them. When the Vormus family saw this, they frowned in surprise. They asked Will what kind of sorcery he used, how he combined the magic of fire and water. Will sent two bursts of magic towards the guys. The guys were not ready for a surprise attack. The magic clots hit the guys right in the head. They held their breath. This magic attack was a water trap for the Vormus family guys. Will kept the boys in a water trap. Will said that if the guys didn't admit defeat, they might end up suffocating. Will raised his hand. Magic emanated from his index finger. Will sighed and said that the guys had 4 guardian deities in their arsenal, but even with them they could not defeat Will. The guys should train better. Will looked away, alarmed. Where the guys were standing, they started drinking the water that surrounded their head. Will made a strange expression when he saw the boys' full bellies. The guys, having drunk all the water, began to say that they could not be defeated so easily. Will needed to prepare for his defeat. Will closed his eyes and said that the guys shouldn't hope that he would just give up. It was worth ending this battle. The Vormus family looked at Will in surprise. They didn't understand what he meant. Will closed his eyes and began to conjure, and the water in the children's bellies began to gurgle. Danon clutched at his bulging stomach. Will stood with his arm outstretched. The Vormus family guys were holding their bellies and told Will to wait. They had to go to the bathroom, or they were going to burst. Will replied that, of course, they had to go to the bathroom, because they had drunk so much water. Will stood in front of the guys who continued to hold their bellies. He said that it was better for the guys to admit defeat and go to the bathroom before it was too late. Beads of sweat appeared on Danon's face. The guys refused to admit defeat. Danon shouted at Will that Will could kill them since they would not admit defeat. Will was stunned to hear such a response from the guys. Will got nervous and said that the guys didn't seem to be in their right mind. If they didn't admit defeat, they would go to the bathroom in front of everyone. The Vormus family guys were unbearably tense. Their teeth were clenched as much as possible. The next moment, an unwinding roll of toilet paper appeared. Tears and saliva began to flow from the mouths and eyes of the Vormus family children. Their faces were already relaxed, and small insects began to fly over them. The spectators surrounding the arena were shocked by what was happening. They said that the guys had completely disgraced themselves. They looked pathetic. The guys were sitting on their knees, flies were circling over them, and the people around them who were watching the battle began calling names and insulting the children of the Vormus family. Will looked at Danon's tear-stained face and thought that he probably overdid it because he humiliated the guys in front of everyone. On the other hand, he did the right thing because the guys themselves insisted that the fight take place. Will grabbed the boys by their shirts, tears streaming from their eyes. Will pulled them to him and angrily told them that the boys should no longer approach Will and his sister. The guys' teeth were chattering. They were very scared. Will held the guys at arm's length. He shouted that their fight could be considered over. There was an unpleasant smell coming from the guys. Will, holding the guys by their shirts, thought it was a little cruel of him when he cast a terrifying voice with magic, but the guys deserved it all. The boys' faces were tear-stained, and flies were flying around them. Will raised his head, wondering if the deities of the boys were worthy of being their guardians. Will was holding Ivan's shirt, and Will's hand began to glow with magic. Tears were streaming from Ivan's eyes. Will let the guys go. Then he lowered his head and looked at his hands. They were glowing with magic. He didn't understand why this was happening. The man in the hat leaned on the arena and asked Will if he was okay. Will turned around and replied that everything was fine. The man started climbing into the arena and said that now was the time to end it. The man stood next to Will and raised his hand up. The man loudly announced the outcome of the fight, that Will had defeated the guys. The people watching the fight began to rejoice at Will's victory. Will looked at the man and said that he was very sorry that the fight had ended with such consequences, and he was ready to stay to help with the cleaning. The man wanted to give Will an answer, but someone interrupted him and said that Will should not worry about the consequences. There were two people standing with Artie. They were wearing crying clothes. They had scarves with patches of some kind of coat of arms tied around their necks. One of them said that Will needed to go with them. There was a faint aura coming from the strangers. One of the strangers was looking at the man in the hat. Will was standing next to the man. The stranger said that the exam would not be cancelled, so they would have to take care of it. Artie would control the process. The man agreed with the stranger. The children of the Vormus family were still standing in place. They could not come to their senses. Flies were flying over them. Will suggested that he could help clean up the arena before the exam started. Artie replied that Will shouldn't worry about it. Artie pointed to the side. There was a stone golem next to her. She said that it would automatically clean the entire room as soon as it was turned on. Will was delighted by the golem standing in front of him, who was holding a broom. The hooded strangers said it was time for them and Will to go. Will turned around and agreed to go with them. Will turned around. He heard someone calling his name. It was Artie who called him, her face flushed with embarrassment. She adjusted her scarf with one hand and said she was grateful to Will for his kindness. Will was walking between strangers in raincoats. He turned around and said with a smile on his face that Artie shouldn't thank him because of him the guys had dirtied the arena. He apologizes for not being able to prevent this situation. Will raised his hand and called Rin and Fury to him. He invited them to come with him. They immediately ran up to him and started following him. Will, Rin, and Fury followed the two cloaked strangers down the hallway. There were large windows in the hallway, which allowed sunlight to enter the room. Will looked at the glowing auras of the two strangers and thought that the strangers were skillfully hiding their magical abilities. But still, something was wrong. Most likely, they were just blocking their power so that Will could not feel it. Will continued to stare ahead, his face expressionless. He thought that if the strangers represented an organization, it showed that Artie was their student, and they wanted to destroy the monster of the disaster. With the help of magic, a door opens in front of Will. He enters a room with large windows that slightly cover the curtains. On the curtains, as well as on the scarves of strangers, there was some kind of coat of arms. Will looked around the room, and there were swords on the wall, reflecting the sunlight. Will became alert and thought that he had seen these swords before, and he knew exactly who they belonged to. One of the strangers jumped on Will from behind, but with his hood down, his face could be seen. The stranger was crying with happiness and said that it had been too long since they had seen the master. Will didn't understand what was going on. The second stranger was standing nearby. The hood was still on his head. He was confused. The stranger who jumped on Will said that Will had become so cute, and Will, in turn, asked to be left alone. The stranger, who continued to hold Will by the neck, said that she had wanted to meet her teacher for so long. Will remembered the swords they had seen on the wall. He thought Zenobia had used these swords. It was to her that the stranger turned out to be. Zenobia continued to hold Will by the neck. She was crying a lot. Will tried to restrain himself and thought that he had no doubt it was her. She knew who he was in a previous life. The girl continued hugging Will. He said he thought she was Zenobia. She happily said that Will was right. Next to them was another man in a robe. His face was not visible. It was covered with a dark hood. Will closed his eyes and asked her why she ran up and hugged a stranger from behind. She staggered and was shocked by this kind of question. Will turned to her and said that, plus, they hadn't even seen each other's faces. He was wondering who she wanted to see. Zenobia blushed deeply and couldn't say anything. A moment later, tears rolled down her red face from embarrassment. She began to speak indistinctly, which she immediately sensed in Will as her teacher. Will tensed up and asked Zenobia to gather her strength and stop crying. The second stranger takes off his hood and says that he will explain everything to Will now. Will turns in surprise in the direction from which the voice came. Will saw the man's face and recognized him. The second stranger was Milt. The man had blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and wore glasses on his face. Milt said it's been a long time since they last met. Will looked at Milt in surprise. Will thought that he felt Milt's magic as soon as he took off his hood. Such magic could belong only to him. Milt said that 4 of Will's students serve as the president of this academy. Milt closed his eyes and pulled out a bundle of paper in front of him. He said that he immediately recognized the master, through identification, with the help of this bundle, which he held in his hands. Milt unfolded the paper. There were many inscriptions on it and a coat of arms in the middle of the sheet. Milt said that it was a magic package. It was attached to the questionnaire in order to measure the amount of magical power of the subject in advance. Will rubbed his chin thoughtfully, remembering how he had filled out this form before. He was sitting at a table with a lot of papers and holding a bundle in his hands. Zenobia and Milt were holding this package. She said that they were immediately sent this package so that they could understand for sure if it was the master's property. Milt said that at first he thought that a child had been born who had adopted the qualities of a mother. Zenobia raised her hand in front of her and said that as soon as they found out about this, they decided to observe Will. Zenobia and Milt specifically sent Artie to Will so that she could look after Will and accompany him everywhere. Will looked at Zenobia and said that it turns out Artie is Zenobia's student. Will praised Zenobia. She replied that it was her duty to raise a worthy student, just as her master had raised her before. Will looked at Milt. He said that if he became a child who inherited the qualities of a master, he would also follow his teacher. Will replied that he had no doubt that Milt had made a really good teacher. Milt cupped his chin in his hand and thoughtfully said that he had heard that the guardian deities considered the pillar. It seemed the gods loved those guys very much. They stay close to them. Will looked at Milt in surprise and thought that he hadn't changed a bit. Milt remembered how he had hastily checked the measurement barrier's log, and it turned out that the child was the reincarnation of the master, and that he was definitely an apostle. Will looked at it in surprise and wondered what the word apostle might mean. Will remembered something the goddess had said before. She raised her hand up and said that she hoped Will would behave himself, because he was an apostle, and Will should never forget that. Milt remembered Mater's old appearance. He said that in a recent duel, Milt noticed something. Once Mater showed him a spell to cause diarrhea in an enemy. Will replied that he had probably used this terrible spell in a previous life. Milt stretched out his hand in front of him and said that, thanks to this spell, he realized that Will was the reincarnation of the master. Will replied that he thought it was a good argument to get to know him. Milt got nervous and said he thought maybe they just wouldn't notice it. Will stood and stared at Milt in silence. Will smiled maliciously and said that he had so many more stories from his past life that they would definitely be able to recognize him. Zenobia appeared behind Will, and she enthusiastically asked if Will could tell her these stories. Zenobia drooped when she heard Will's story. He said that when Zenobia was about 5 years old, she asked Will to shave half of her head. Zenobia blushed with embarrassment. She said that such a thing could happen. Zenobia took Will by the shoulders and nervously said that more than 200 years had passed and it was time to get new stories. She was wondering what Will was doing when he was in heaven. Milt listened to the conversation between Zenobia and Will. He didn't understand anything. Will said that the goddess had told him about the current situation, but alas, he was about 10 years old now. Zenobia exclaimed that Will should tell her everything he knows himself. A few hours passed. The guys were sitting at the slot. Will said he understood about the Tinebers cult. Milt sat across from me and said that he and the others were a rescue squad created to fight the cult. Milt began to say that, knowing that the Beast of Calamity had died, their first priority now was to prevent it from resurrecting again. Will asked that even the rescue squad couldn't stop the cult from resurrecting the beast. Milt put his hands on his feet and bent down. He said that most fanatics are ordinary people, but at the center of all events is a demon controlling them. Will sat in silence and listened to Milt's story. Will introduced a huge, horned demon. He thought that demons are very powerful creatures that are almost impossible to subdue. Will imagined a laughing demon and thought that even the students who would become strong warriors in the future couldn't defeat them because of their unimaginable power. Milt mysteriously adjusted his glasses with his hand and said that some information had not been confirmed before the monster's death. Will asked in surprise what this information was. Milt began to tell them that more powerful demons had appeared, but they were able to defeat them with the help of 4 students. Will was surprised by what he heard. Milt remembered the images of 2 girls, a young man and a dragon. Milt, sitting across from Will, said that these demons were once fanatics like the Beast of Disasters, but their power grew and they became uncontrollable. Will asked if it was possible to transform a human into a demon. Will exhaled heavily and said that he had certainly trained to defeat demons, but it seemed to him that now it was an impossible task for him. Milt replied that they were very happy that they had found Will. Artie sat next to him and listened. Milt reached out to Will and said that they were very interested in listening to Will's stories, especially about his education when he was in heaven. Will happily said that he was surprised by Milt's words, because he had been away and was now back after 100 years. Milt started smiling and said that time was flying too fast, and he wasn't the same young guy anymore. Hunching his shoulders a little, Will replied that despite the fact that Milt was 120 years old, he couldn't have been more than 60 years old. Milt looked at Will and said that his appearance is supported by internal energy, so he looks younger than his age. Milt's eyes filled with tears. Artie looked at Milt and asked cheerfully that Milt had been deliberately holding back his emotions all this time. Milt took off his glasses and said that Artie was right. He thought he would never be able to meet the master again. Artie cheerfully said that for the future, she thought it would be nice for Will to become a student at the academy, but at the same time he needs to hide his past. Will raised his hand and replied that he needed to take the entrance exams first. Artie remembered the face of the man in the little hat. She said that Will showed his excellent skills during the fight. The examiner who conducted the fight allowed Will to enter the academy without exams. Will was surprised by this outcome of events. Milt picked up the cup and brought it to his mouth. Then he said that he needed to notify Dion and Regina that Will was here. Will asked in surprise how the boys would be notified of this. Milt raised his hand, and a ring glinted on one of his fingers. Milt said that he was using a summoning ring that he had created himself, and he would give it to Will a little later. Will was surprised. It was not very clear to him how Milt was able to create this ring. Will looked at Milt and said that Milt's ability to create unusual things was simply excellent. Milt took off his glasses and wiped his tears. He was flattered by Will's praise. Milt activated the ring and explained how to use it properly. Milt started talking and conjured round symbols with inscriptions. He asked the guys if they could hear him. The guys answered his question positively. Dion was standing on a broken pillar surrounded by ruins and wounded. Regina was holding a weapon, and there were wounded enemies behind her. They were talking to Milt, and they were wondering why Milt was calling them. Milt began to say that the guys need to listen carefully, as this information is very important. It consists in the fact that the Master was reborn and appeared with 2 divine ones. Dion and Regina were stunned by this news. Will and Milt listened to the guys. They asked that the master was next to Milt, and if so, they would like to hear his voice. Will approached the magicians to talk to the guys. He said he was glad to hear them, and it hadn't been 100 years since their last conversation. Dione and Regina replied that it had been a long time since they had last seen the master. Will blushed and said he was looking forward to meeting them, and then he would tell them everything in detail. There were extraneous noises during the conversation, and the guys replied that they were also glad to hear from the master. Will closed his eyes and said goodbye to the guys with a smile, and they said goodbye in return. Milt said that time was up and the connection was cut off. Will said with satisfaction that even after 100 years, the guys haven't changed at all. For example, Milt is still very sentimental. Milt was embarrassed to hear Will's words. Zenobia was sitting next to Milt. Zenobia jerked and blushed when she heard a knock on the door. It was Artie. Zenobia allowed Artie to enter. All the guys stood up and waited for Artie to enter the room. Artie came into the room and said that she had already returned from her assignment. Zenobia replied that Will would continue to study at the academy and therefore Artie would continue to look after him. She should always be by his side. Artie blushed with embarrassment. Zenobia pulled her hand aside and said that Will would be a student and wanted to become a member of the rescue squad, so Artie would need to keep an eye on him so that he wouldn't embarrass them. Artie was surprised that Will could go to the academy so easily. Zenobia put her hand on Artie's shoulder and said that she believed in Artie's abilities, so she was counting on her to help Will. Artie dutifully agreed with Zenobia. Artie thought for a while. Then she blushed in embarrassment and said that she had a suggestion that she would like to discuss with Zenobia. Zenobia was ready to listen to Artie. Artie stood in front of Zenobia, her cheeks flushed, and she asked if she could study at the academy with Will. Zenobia looked at Artie in surprise. Milt and Will stood behind Artie. She said that she had previously acted as an assistant in the administration of the exam. There was nothing unnatural if she wanted to become a student who had previously been seen as an assistant. Artie spread her arms to the side and asked Zenobia what Zenobia thought of her proposal. Zenobia thought for a while. Zenobia came up to Artie and patted her on the head. Then she said that she had come up with a great idea. Artie blushed with embarrassment and thanked Zenobia for her kind words. Zenobia turned to Will and asked if he agreed to Artie's proposal. He smiled and agreed with Zenobia. Will thought that if it was being done in order to keep his identity a secret, then he wasn't against this outcome of events. Will approached Artie and took her hands. He smiled and said that he was very happy to continue their cooperation. Artie smiled and agreed with Will's words. Zenobia stood in front of Artie and said she didn't have any news Zenobia needed to know. Artie replied that she had a report on the exam. It passed without problems and 30 people were selected. Milt had already heard about it. Zenobia raised her hand and asked if anyone had been seriously injured during the exam. Artie thought about it. Then she recalled the wounded faces of the Worms family boys and said that Dan and Ivan had suffered serious injuries. Will stood in front of Artie and asked why the guys had suffered such serious injuries after him. Artie raised her hands and said that Will shouldn't worry, as the guys were injured after the end of their fight. Artie recalled the guys who were holding a jar of insects in their hands and said that after the fight with Will, they decided to find him and take revenge. They found poisonous insects and wanted to set them on Will, but they couldn't cope. The insects escaped and bit them. Artie recalled the guys lying in bed with bandaged bodies. She continued to tell that the guys were in the hospital again after this incident with the insects. They were badly hurt. The man who was the referee during Will's battle with the boys told the Worms family boys that he was not jealous of their divine guardians. Artie said that the guys might not calm down even after that and would continue to harass Will. Artie said that the Worms family's guys are at pillar number 0. Zenobia, Will, and Milt were surprised to hear Artie's words. Zenobia and Milt panicked. Zenobia and Milt looked at each other, and he asked if the human race could mess with the apostles. Milt covered his mouth with his hand and said that, in his opinion, the probability of successfully establishing contact between the boys and the apostles was 0. Artie stood to the side, not understanding what was going on. Zenobia, Milt, and Will were whispering away from Artie, wondering if the boys would be able to establish contact with the apostles. Will remembered how he had stood at the post with the ball earlier and thought about it. The events took place in the world of the gods. Large columns supported the ceiling painted with magical symbols. A goddess stood in front of Will, stroking Will's head, and she asked him why Will was using that portal again. The goddess moved away from Will and asked why Will had come to them. Maybe he wanted to ask about those close relatives, or he had been spying on her all this time. The goddess blushed and thought for a while. The goddess turned around. Her cheeks were red. She replied that it was all an accident. Will drooped and was unhappy with her answer. The goddess raised her hand up and asked if Will knew why he had not received the blessing, but all because he had removed it himself. Will was angry and surprised to hear the goddess's words. The goddess recalled their earlier conversation. She said that Will himself had said earlier that he did not deserve to even touch the deities. Will thought about it and replied that he could say such a thing, but did not remember the reason that could make him say such a thing. The goddess replied that Will was an apostle, in other words, a messenger of God. Will asked if the apostle could possibly have any ability. The goddess recalled their last meeting. She said that if the other gods had not prevented her, then she would have told about it earlier right away. The goddess and Will were sitting on a small hill, with other deities walking behind them, and he asked what these apostles looked like. The goddess replied that she would explain everything the next time he visited her. Will looked at the goddess menacingly and said that everything was clear with him, but why did the Worm's family guys have as many as 4 deities? The goddess tensed up a little and thought that Will hadn't changed at all. The goddess recalled the images of various gods and said that they do not choose people according to any principles. They just help because it is necessary. The goddess smiled and added that, alas, they are not omnipotent either. Will and the goddess continued to sit. She said that the paradox lies in this. Even the most unfortunate people are guarded by deities. Isn't it funny? Will agreed with her. Will gradually began to flicker and gradually disappear. The goddess said that it seemed like it was time for him to return to his world. He shouldn't come to her often. Will was surprised by her words. The goddess began to smile and said that if he looked at her too often, sooner or later his consciousness would become confused, and eventually he might die. Will replied that yes, it could be a problem. The goddess said a few more words before he returned to his world that she would figure out how to contact him so that he would be as little present in her world as possible, because he was not yet a god. Will returns to Milt and Zenobia. They were standing in an unusual room next to the pillar for communicating with the guardians. Zenobia said that Will is really very strong. Will replied that it took too long to explain, but it was because of reincarnation. Will looked at Milt and said that the time axis between the worlds was different, so they couldn't stay there for so long, but thanks to that, he was able to practice. Will, Zenobia, and Milt were sitting at the table, with Fury and Rune next to them. Will was told about his plans for the future. Then Will said goodbye to everyone and returned to Soraya. A few days later, Will was outside, sitting on a bench, with Soraya running around and playing with the animals. Will, sitting on the bench, recalled a conversation with Milt, who said that the result would be announced in a week and the ceremony would take place on the same day, so Will should be ready. Will didn't understand why he didn't have any worries. Soraya picked Rune up in her arms and told Will that he needed to look at them. Fury was right next to her. Will looked in Soraya's direction and said that she shouldn't go too far. Will, sitting on the bench, thought that here he could spend a little time with his thoughts and not worry about anything. Someone was heading towards him. Will heard people talking and looked away. A girl was walking towards him. She was wearing a big dark hat and a dark suit with gloves. She looked at Will and said that she needed him. There were soldiers standing behind the girl. The girl took Will's hand and said that she was very grateful to him for the moment when Will saved her in the forest. Will blushed with embarrassment and said that it was not worth thanking him, as it was a simple necessity. Will looked at the girl and introduced himself to her. She clasped her hands in front of her and replied that he was from that famous Worms family. There was a soldier behind the girl. He put his hand to his mouth and coughed. The girl tensed up. The girl picked up the dress. She said she was sorry for not introducing herself. The girl was the 3rd princess of the Ermati family, Tina Dia Ermati. She looked at Will and said it was important for her to get to know him. Will recalled the map of the kingdoms that are located nearby and thought that the kingdom of Baradoa adjoins the northeast and is the empire of Ermati. Will, at one time, always had good relations with this empire. Tina smiled, then raised her finger in front of her. She said that students always get a middle name from the teacher, so she got the middle name Dia. Will looked at her and said she was worthy of praise at that age. Tina clasped her hands in front of her and said that the 3rd princess was certainly unlikely to inherit the throne, so she was very happy to attend this academy on Lord Dion's recommendation, and she intended to receive the best education here. Soraya came up to Will and called him, and he looked back at her. Soraya had a Fury sitting on her head, and Rin was next to her. Will introduced Tina to Soraya. The girls exchanged greetings. Will looked at Soraya and said with a smile that Tina was their friend now, so Soraya needed to be friendlier to her. Soraya held out her hands to Tina and agreed with Will's words. Tina blushed and was surprised by Will's words. Tina looked at Will and said he said they were friends now. She didn't have any friends at school, that's why she's so happy now. Tina covered her face with her hat and started shaking. Then Tina abruptly grabbed Will's hands and shouted that she would not cause them any problems. She was so happy to make friends with the guys. The soldier standing behind Tina said it was time for her to leave. Tina turned to him. Tina told Will that she was sorry, but it was time to go. Will replied that everything was fine and they would see each other again. Tina went to the side where the soldiers were standing. Half the soldiers were standing in front of Will. They put their hands on their chests and bowed down in front of him. Will stood in front of him, with Soraya, Fury, and Rin by his side. He was surprised by the soldiers' behavior. The soldiers straightened up and headed towards the fleeing Tina. She looked towards Will and the others and waved at them. Will remembered the faces of some of the soldiers and thought for a moment he had fought with them before. Surprised, Soraya asked if Will was okay. He replied that everything was fine. Will stroked Soraya's head and, with a smile on his face, said that they could go on playing. Soraya was happy with Will's suggestion. There was someone hiding behind a tree next to the guys. It turned out to be a girl with ears and a tattoo. She recognized Will. Will was sitting across from Artie, and she had a gun in her hand. There were trees on the street where the boys were standing, with leaves falling from them. Saria was lying on a bench with Fury under her head. Will and Artie were alert and ready to start the battle. Will and Artie stood in fighting poses for a while and looked at each other. Saria continued to sleep on the bench with Fury. She was snoring softly. Saria, lying on Fury, began to toss and turn. Something bothered her. Fury continued to sleep. Will looked at Artie with a serious look, and she looked at him the same way. Artie then raised her sword above herself and attacked Will first. During the attack, she screamed loudly. The sword was aimed straight at Will. He was extremely focused and serious. Will grabs Artie's sword with both hands. She hovered in the air with the sword. She was very surprised by this outcome of events. Will held the sword with both hands. They were shaking a little. Artie exclaimed that Will should not lower her sword. Then Will pushes the sword. Artie is holding aside and gets close to her. He touches her shoulder. Will grabs Artie by the shoulders and throws her over him. She opened her mouth in shock in flight. Artie lands on his feet and uses one hand on the floor to keep his balance. Artie doesn't have time to come to her senses, as her own sword appears in front of her, with its sharp end pointed at her face. Realizing this, she is very surprised. Will holds Artie's sword, she says without getting up from her knees that she is ready to give up. The sword glittered in the sun. Will passes the sword to Artie. Artie says that now, after the fight, she began to understand why her teacher calls Will the master. Will replies that she is also skilled with a sword. Will stands in front of Artie and says that now he can say that they really had a full workout. Soraya woke up and started yawning loudly, covering her wide-open mouth. Saria rubbed her eye with one hand while she stroked Fury, who was also yawning, with the other. Saria told Will that she was already awake. Saria looked at the guys in surprise and said that she welcomed Artie. They were playing without her. Again, she missed everything. Artie and Will looked at Soraya's reddened face. Will put one hand on his belt and asked Artie that it was time for her to leave. Artie looked at Saria and replied that it was time for her to go. Saria was upset after hearing Artie's words. Soraya took Artie by the sleeve and tearfully asked if Artie could stay a little longer and play with her. Artie blushed and replied that she could stay, but if only for a short time. The wind stirred the treetops. So a week passed. Many people came to the booth to find out the results of the entrance exams. Will stood at the back of the crowd, with Saria, Fury, and Rin by his side. Will thought that he already knew his results, but he pretended to be watching, otherwise the other students might suspect him of something. Saria raised her hands and asked Will if his name was on that stand. Will blushed and was embarrassed that his name would be there for a long time. Will looked at the stand and thought that there were no names of Ivan and Dan on the stand. Someone greeted Will. He heard himself being addressed and turned around. A girl with ears like an animal appeared in front of Will. She held a girl who looked like herself with one hand and raised the other up and said that her name was Rosetta, and the girl who was standing with her was her sister Rosa. The rose was peeking out from behind the rosette. Rosa threw herself into Soraya's arms, and they greeted each other. Will stood next to her and was shocked. He did not understand how the girls could know each other. Rosa and Saria were holding hands and smiling. Saria said that they had played with Rose before. Doesn't Will remember that moment? Will replied that he understood everything and since he had met the girls today. Will stood in front of Rosetta and said he was grateful that she was taking care of her sister. Rosetta closed her eyes in embarrassment and replied that Rosa was happy to find and make friends with new friends. Rosetta raised her hands. She blushed and said that she had passed the entrance exam, so she would be studying at the academy starting this year. Will smiled and replied, "That's good news." He winked with one eye and said that he knew that it was she who had been following him yesterday. Rosetta was all disheveled and blushed at Will's words. She was surprised how Will had figured her out. He replied that he did not feel threatened, so he did not worry. Rosetta scratched her head nervously and said that she was a little worried when she heard him talking to the princess. She apologizes for her behavior. Will replied that she shouldn't apologize. He would have done the same in her place. Will held out his hand to Rosetta and said that since their sisters were friends, he hoped that he and Rosetta would get along too. Rosetta agreed with Will's words. They started shaking hands merrily. Saria and Rosa, and they took turns embarrassing Will and Rosetta. Will smiled and looked towards the girls, and Rosetta succumbed to the girls' provocations. She blushed all over and asked her not to embarrass her. Fury and Rin continued to yawn. The day of the dedication ceremony arrived. People were walking into a large building with columns. People were sitting in a large room and listening to the leaders, and the third princess, Tina, was also speaking there. She was reading from a book. I ate a briefing for freshmen. It was held in a classroom. The teacher wrote and showed symbols on the blackboard. The students sat at their desks and listened attentively. Then there was a general meeting where Will and the others met and got to know each other over drinks. Will was holding Soraya in his arms. Tina was standing next to him, and Artie was stroking Soraya's head. Then came the lunch break. At the entrance to the room there was a carved plaque in the form of a loaf of bread and wheat ears. Will and the rest of the guys, along with the animals, were sitting at the table and eating. Rosetta held a glass in her hands and said that it seemed her village had been attacked by a demon, so she wanted to help catch it, but she needed help with that. Will sat across from her and listened to her. Rosetta flattened her ears and let out a tear. Then she said that her guardian is the god of hunting, so she is not very well versed in martial arts. Her deity is not suitable for fighting at all. Will looked at Rosetta and said that he was ready to join her in the search for the monster, because he couldn't leave a friend in the lurch. Rosetta clenched her fists and thanked Will happily. Rose put a spoonful of food in Saria's mouth. Watching the girls, Will said that if they were going to go in search of a demon, then they needed to assemble a team that could wield both magic and weapons. After some time, Tina appears in front of Will. She was holding a magic staff in her hands, and Artie, she had a sword in a scabbard on her belt. Will was standing in front of Tina with Rosetta next to him. Will said that Rosetta had probably already met the girls. These were Artie and Tina. They were excellent swordsmen and magicians. Tina nervously said that Will was praising her too much. Will stood and looked at Tina, Rosetta, and Artie. He thought that they would make a good team, which included a swordsman, a hunter, a magician, and a healer. Artie put her hand to her face so that only Will could make out her words, and said that they had received permission from Zenobia, so they could safely leave the walls of the academy. Will thanked Artie. Rosetta wiggled her ears and offered to go. Rosetta and Tina cheerfully jumped into the air, saying that they needed to get rid of the demon as soon as possible. Will was standing behind her, his hands on his waist, smiling. Artie was also standing behind me and didn't show any emotion. Birds flew up from the crowns of the lush trees. The wolf's body split into two parts. A stranger appeared, wearing a hood that covered his face, and in his hands he held the bones of a skeleton, namely a spine and a skull on top. The demon is already higher in search of Will and his team. A stranger's face appeared from behind the hood. Instead of a face, there was a skull with sharp teeth. The boys were walking through the forest near the palace. Will walked in front, Artie walked behind, Rosetta and Tina walked between them. Tina was walking and singing a song. Tina was holding her magic staff in her hands, smiling and singing a song. Will walked in front of Tina and smiled. She blushed and said that Will looked very happy. Tina was walking behind Will. She stuck her tongue out of her mouth and seemed like it was just like walking with friends. Will walked and smiled. He said that he understood, he was happy, just like Tina. The guys were passing by a sprawling tree. Tina followed Will and said that if something happened to them, she could heal any wound. She was a good healer. Will turned around and said they were counting on Tina. Will asked if Tina could heal wounds. Then her guardian was the god of water. Tina smiled and replied that Will was right. Tina raised 2 fingers and said that she still had several guardians, namely the god of thunder, air, fire, and ice. Will looked at her in surprise and said that she had 8 pillars, including the human god. Tina started waving her hands nervously and said that there were talented people like Will who could use just one guardian deity. Will laughed and asked Tina to stop flattering him. Will stood in front of Rosetta. He spread his arms to the side and said that she was getting a guardian, the god of hunting. Rosetta looked at Will and agreed with Will's words. Rosetta had a bow on her back. She looked to the side and said that she was good with a bow, and she could also recognize the tracks of any creature, so they would quickly find the demon. One bird flew over the treetops. The children were surrounded by trees and shrubs. Rosetta stretched out her hand in front of her and started pointing to the side. She said that from here you can see the village. Will and Tina walked over to Rosetta and peered into the distance. Rosetta said that the inhabitants of this village earn money by hunting and selling sheep. In her opinion, this place is a great place to live. Will smiled and agreed with Rosetta's words. The boys were standing on a small hill, and from there they could see the whole village with houses and plots for crops. The villagers looked like Rosetta. They also had ears and tattoos on their arms. Someone was engaged in planting herbs, and someone was engaged in construction work. Rosetta walked towards them. She raised her hand up and cheerfully greeted the villagers. The man with the tattoo on his face and the woman standing next to him recognized Rosetta. Rosetta moved closer to the villagers. The residents started asking her that she had returned too quickly, that she had failed the exam. She waved her hand and said that she had passed everything and entered the academy. Rosetta scratched her head in embarrassment. The villagers praised her and congratulated her on entering the academy. She considered her the pride of their village. Will and the girls stood behind and thought that they were in Rosetta's native village. Rosetta pointed at the guys and said that she would like to introduce the villagers with her friends. Rosetta introduced Will, Artie the swordsman, and Tina the healer to the villagers. The guys, in turn, were glad to meet the residents of Rosetta's native village. They bowed in honor of their acquaintance. One of the elderly villagers came up to Will and shook his hand. He said that since Rosetta had friends, he was very pleased to meet them. Will was shaking the man's hand and smiling. Rosetta spread her arms to the side and addressed the rest of the villagers. She said that they had come here to destroy the demon. The villagers looked at Rosetta and began to rejoice at her words. An elderly man approached Tina and said that they had contacted the guild to have adventurers help them, so he was very grateful that the guys had come to their aid. Tina raised her hands and said that she was glad and that she was Rosetta's friend. Will turned to an elderly man and asked him if he could tell him more about the demon that attacked their village. The man agreed to tell about the demon. The man recalled the events of the first meeting with the demon. The first one who met the demon was a villager. He said that the demon appeared in the pastures. The man was grazing sheep with his dog and did not even notice the appearance of the demon in front of him. The man began to recall further events and continued the story that the man, seeing the demon, began to run away in fear to the village. He tried to call the sheep after him, but the demon managed to drag many away and also got their crops and ruined the harvest. After listening to the story about the demon, the boys left the village and headed to the place where they first saw the demon. Will was studying the tree, Rosetta was studying the footprints. She found something and invited the guys to take a look at the find. Rosetta put her hand next to a large footprint on the ground. She said that this footprint looked like the footprint of a demon bear. The guys were surprised by such a large print. Rosetta squatted down and looked towards the bushes. She said that the trail was going in that direction. The guys decided that the demon could have returned to his lair, but they needed to follow these tracks. Gradually, the sky began to darken. A little later, the heroes reach a small clearing. They see a small dark cave in front of them. Someone says they think they found her. It was also added that the tracks end at the cave. The boys continued to stand together in the bushes near the cave. Rosetta said it looked like their target was inside the cave. She looked at Tina and asked about what she was doing. At this time, Tina stood very surprised and opened her mouth in amazement. She was making a long sound, as if she was preparing to start talking. Then the girl turned to her team and asked if they thought they could use magic. Tina didn't understand the girl and asked what she meant. Will smiled and said what was to be expected from Tina, because the girl's strategy also has a place. Tina awkwardly scratched her head and smiled. Rosetta said that when the demon comes out of the cave, they will leave it with the help of her bow and Tina's magic. Tina smiled and told the team to leave it to her. Rosetta continued and said that Artie would then attack the demon with a sword. Artie agreed and said she understood. Rosetta said Will would be there in case something went wrong. Will agreed. The group gathered, and Rosetta asked if everyone was ready. She started to say the countdown. Some time later, the operation began. Tina raised her finger up and started using magic power. She summoned the magic ball directly above her head. The girl sent a huge fireball straight towards the demon's cave. Suddenly, the girl awkwardly said that it seemed she had overdone it a little and needed to make the ball smaller, otherwise a big fire would happen. Suddenly, there was a very loud roar. The girls were surprised by this roar. The next moment, a huge bear jumped out at the girls. Tina was surprised by the appearance of this huge monster. The bear continued to night menacingly and advance on the girls. Tina and Rosetta stared at the monster in horror. Rosetta opened her eyes and said that the monster was just huge. Tina squeezed her eyes shut in horror and screamed. The next moment, Artie appeared between the girls, who at that moment drew a sword from her scabbard, and a slashing blow was heard. Artie was already right behind the monster. Her sword glinted, and the demon bear froze in its menacing stance. Artie sheathed her sword with a soft sound and said that everything was ready. The demon bear fell with a crash at that moment. Tina indignantly apologized to the guys and then said that she was so scared that she was a little confused when she saw how big this monster was. Tina then told Artie that she was so cool and held the sword so confidently. She said Artie was great. Rosetta also said that although she has good eyesight and attentiveness, she could not notice him, and Artie was able to deal with him in no time. Will thought that, as expected from his student. Then Artie looked at the carcass of the demon bear that was lying nearby and said that this bear really had a huge body. Rosetta was surprised by Artie's words. She walked up to the demon bear and spread her arms. She agreed with Artie and said that the girl was right. The fur looks pretty thick, but it's actually very thin. Suddenly, the girls were distracted by Will. He asked Rosetta to stop, and then thoughtfully put his hand to his chin and asked if his demon bear didn't eat sheep in large numbers. Rosetta said it was very strange, so she would go and look into the cave. Will turned to Artie and said that they would go look at everything here, while Artie and Tina should butcher the bear. Rosetta told the girl that they could take her knife because it was very sharp. Artie replied that she understood. She picked up a sharp knife. After a while, Will and Rosetta came out of the cave. Will turned to Tina and apologized, and then said that they had been in the cave for quite a long time. Rosetta closed her eyes and said it was very strange. There were no bones, no fur, and nothing else in the cave. It's possible that a completely different demon ate the sheep. Artie watched and thought about the huge claw. Rosetta added, looking at the carcass of the bear, that in that case they would need to find another demon before it ate someone else. Will approached the carcass and said that the girls had done a great job. Artie asked what they would do with it. Will winked and said that he was offering to take this bear to Rosetta's village. The girl was very surprised and cried out in surprise. Will looked at the girls and said that he thought the bear carcass would be an excellent compensation for the damage caused. He asks the girls how they think. Tina said she agreed with Will and called him a friend. Artie said she didn't mind either. Then Will looked at Rosetta and asked if everything was okay. The girl was very surprised, and then she smiled with tears in her eyes and thanked the guys for all this. Will suggested that the girls collect everything and take it to the village, and the residents will decide for themselves what to do. He saw that the fur was quite large and heavy. Rosetta added that they can only take the fur, as the meat may be poisoned due to the demon, so they need to get rid of the meat. Tina suggested making a fire ourselves, rather than using magic, and you can squeeze the meat in the flame. Suddenly, Will looks at the jumped-out Fury. The next moment, Fury jumped out of Will's body and ran to the side. Will stretched out his hand towards Fury and shouted after him. He realized that he couldn't hold it. Fury jumped straight into the body of the butchered demon bear. In the next instant, it expanded in size and began to devour the carcass of the demon bear. A group of guys were shocked to see this. Will didn't know Fury could do that, so he didn't understand what was going on. Rosetta and Artie continued to watch what was happening. At that moment, the pieces of the demon bear's body began to dissolve into Fury's body. Will and Rosetta watched in amazement. Rosetta was surprised, looking at the pieces of meat that were dissolving into Fury's body, and said that the meat was disappearing right before her eyes. Rosetta and Tina looked at the smaller Fury. Rosetta said it was incredible because all that remained were fur and fangs. Then Fury released something from himself, and Tina realized that these were substances after processing food in Fury's body. Fury stood awkwardly next to the dark mass. Rosetta said it looked more like humus, but Tina said it was amazing that such a thing could happen in Fury's body. Tina hugged Fury and said that, as she thought, Fury was just a wonderful slime. Rosetta turned towards Tina and Fury and started shouting negatively, opening her mouth. Rosetta looked in Will's direction and started shouting about how the slime could just digest the bear demon like that. She was pretty sure she didn't believe that, and that Fury was a new species. Will scratched his cheek and said that he didn't know much about Fury's abilities. Will turned to Rosetta and told her they had to go. They can inspect everything around the pasture again, so as not to miss a single clue. Maybe they had overlooked something after all. Rosetta agreed and said she would go with Will. After a while, the group arrives at the pasture. They reached the right place, as the fence near the forest was broken. They looked towards the broken fence and said that the demon bear came from there. Rosetta sat down next to the trail and said that the tracks of the sheep were nearby, and the tracks of the demon also matched. Then Rosetta stood up and said that it turns out they all came from the other side. She invited the team to look around. A little later, the team came to a deep forest. Suddenly, Rosetta noticed something and told the team that something interesting was in that place. Suddenly, she was surprised and said that there were already traces of wolves, and were they demons too? Will said that it turns out the sheep were stolen by wolves, not a demon bear. Rosetta replied that if the wolves were a pack, they had joined forces with the bear to steal the sheep. Rosetta put her hand to her mouth and said that the tracks were still fresh, which meant they were heading somewhere, and it wasn't difficult to hunt sheep. She asked the boys to look at the tracks, which were identical, so the sheep were following together, but is this possible without a shepherd? Then Rosetta saw something amazing and said about the 11 tracks. Will was surprised and said that it was impossible, and then asked if the girl had miscalculated and if it could be that she had suddenly made a mistake. Rosetta said that she had calculated everything correctly. She suggested that the team follow the tracks further because, apparently, they ran into this cave. Rosetta then said that there was no sign of wolves and that the sheep had come here by themselves and hidden from the demons. Will asked if that was possible. Rosetta replied that the guys might not believe it, but they couldn't have come here on their own. Tina replied that she believed Rosetta. Artie said she believed Rosetta too. Rosetta smiled awkwardly and thanked Artie and Tina. Then the girl approached the cave and said that she would go and look around. Suddenly, the girl looked to the side and was surprised. The next moment, some kind of beast threw Rosetta aside. The girl flew into the air in surprise. Will caught Rosetta and asked about her well-being, and then he looked away. The guys looked and saw a little goat. Rosetta said there's more. Tina looked to the side and told the group to look where she was pointing. There were sheep behind the little goat. There were 8 of them, and then there were 10. Will said it looked like it. The tracks of the 11th belonged to this little goat. Rosetta put her hand out to the side and said that she would never confuse the tracks of a sheep and a goat. The goat made a sound. Will looked at the goat and asked if he was really protecting a flock of sheep. Rosetta was surprised because such a small goat was protecting an entire herd. Will smiled and said that they had come to fight the demon bear at the request of the village, and in the end they had taken all the sheep, all thanks to the goat. He wants to take the goat to himself. The goat positively agreed, and Will thanked him. Tina was surprised that Will was talking to a goat. Will found out that this kid's name is Kiki. He said he stayed with the sheep for a week to keep them out of trouble, helping them ward off wolves. After that, they ran into a cave to hide from predators. He defended the herd from attacking monsters every day, so he is very proud that he did not leave and helped, but now he is very hungry. If he understands what the goat is talking about, then he is not an ordinary animal. He might be a divine beast. At that time, the girls were standing next to the goat. Tina said that Kiki was great and Rosetta wanted the same goat for herself. Suddenly, the howling of wolves was heard. The guys immediately noticed this. Will and Rosetta came out of the cave and thought that there would be one wolf there. However, there was a herd of wolves right in front of them. Will realized that they had surrounded them. The goat rushed into battle, but Will tried to stop him and asked him to wait. The goat began to butt heads and throw the wolves in different directions. Rosetta was surprised that the baby had hit the target exactly. Will replied that the wolves were scared, so they could act. Rosetta strung an arrow on her bow. Tina started using fire magic. Artie drew her sword, and Will used magic on his fists. After a while, Will asked if they had really dealt with all the wolves. Rosetta agreed and said that there were as many of them as the footprints they had found in the thicket of the forest. Tina said that it turns out that they destroyed the demon bear and the wolves, and also saved the sheep. This means that they won and their friendship power was stronger. Will asked the girl to wait, because they had not yet taken the sheep to the village. After a while, the guys quickly hurried to the village. The villagers were very happy to see the sheep safe and sound. They invited them to stay, but they thanked them for their hospitality and decided to leave, as Saria and Rosa were waiting for them at the academy. After a while, Rosetta thanked the team for their help. Tina told her not to worry because they had a great time, and besides, they were friends. Will chewed on the goodies and said that the souvenirs were gorgeous. Tina turned to Will and asked if she could have some goodies too, or if she didn't deserve them. Will said they did a great job, so Tina deserves it as much as anyone. He gives her a cookie. The girl says that if Will thinks so, then she will try. She tries the cookies and finds them very tasty. At that time, the guys were being watched by people from the cult. One of them, it seems, the leader pointed his finger and told his subordinates to destroy everyone. Tina was sitting near a tree while telling everyone that she was very tired. Will stood proudly, looking at the sitting girl, and said that they hadn't had a rest since they left the village. The boy told her that if she wanted, they could go back to rest. Tina sadly turned around and shook her head in denial, saying that Rosa and Soraya were waiting for them. Therefore, the girl suggested returning home as soon as possible. Rosetta looked at the kid uncomprehendingly and wanted to know from Ula what they would do with him. After all, the kid wasn't even afraid of wolves, and it was more like he was a monster. Will said he just had nowhere else to go, so he took him with him, because it wasn't a burden for the guy to take care of him. Rosa started to smile and thought it was very good. The boy was already sitting up and stroking the goat. Suddenly, Will was attracted to something. He fell into a stupor for a moment, but he managed to collect his thoughts and turned his head to the source of the sound. A fireball appeared in the sky. The guy excitedly shouted in the direction of the girls, and later turned to Artie to invite everyone to him. After his shout, there was a loud explosion, and a large cloud of smoke rose into the sky. As it turned out, Will was using his shield, which was just emitting smoke. The guy was holding a shield, and Rosetta, Tina, and Artie were sitting behind him. Will said it all happened very suddenly, and it's good that they managed to hide from such an explosion. Artie said she just decided that the place next to them was the safest. Many demons with different masks appeared near the explosion. They were standing in front of the guys, surrounding them with a crowd. The same people stood with their backs to each other, preparing for battle. Will stood there with a serious face and didn't understand who they were. Artie turned to him and said that they were cult exterminators. The guy thought about it and realized that it was probably him. Tina exclaimed in fright. Tears began to flow from her eyes because she was remembering her friend who fought against the cult exterminators, and how her friend disappeared in that fight. Will turned sharply and seriously to Tina, which startled her, and she instantly blushed and was dumbfounded. But the guy abruptly turned to her with a big smile and said that everything was fine and that she shouldn't worry about it. He started adding to his words that she just needed to use her magic, and Will thought they were demon wolves in human form. Tina gathered her thoughts and agreed with the guy. Meanwhile, Rosetta was shooting arrows at the cult exterminators. The girl could barely manage. At the same moment, Tina screamed and raised her arm and began to attack, and Artie understood that the cult was agile. Rosetta contacted Will because she wanted to know what to do now. He was thinking that they needed to find the source of magic, and so was his past self. At the same moment, Will was hit by a strong wind. It was a raging storm that chopped down all the trees on its way into smooth, round logs. Artie wanted to tell him to be careful, but Will interrupted her, saying that everything was fine. But the light was too bright, and the guy couldn't see anything. But Will used a lightning flash spell, and all the cult destroyers who were next to him flew up. There was a bright light around these demons, but they were only able to destroy this magic because it was too widespread. Rosetta, with a serious face, said that they had beaten her off with a single spell, destroying the Annihilators. Rosetta and Tina didn't understand what was wrong with these two demons, but Artie seriously said that they were still alive, so the girls had to be on their guard. After all, it's because the Annihilators, losing their leader, start to get confused, but these two demons continued to advance. Rosetta wanted to make sure that Tina was ready, she confirmed, and a sword flashed in their hands. Rosetta was holding a bow at full readiness, Artie was holding a sword, and Tina was holding her staff. And finally, the girls were able to breathe a sigh of relief after defeating the remaining destroyers. Will went over to Tina to make sure she was okay. The girl smiled awkwardly, confirming this. After all, they did a great job with them, and Tina hoped they were gone. The guy awkwardly said that they were very tenacious. Tina awkwardly said that she meant they had their revenge. But at that moment, one of the demons started to reach out his hand to attack Tina. The destroyer summoned the seal and directed it towards the guys. He was sick, but suddenly, the seal on his hand was gone. With a loud cry, the demon flew into the air. It was thrown by a goat, which happily began to bleat. Will was embarrassed by the situation and wondered if he was alive or not. Rosetta, standing behind the guy, could hardly believe it. It seemed to Will that he was destroyed by a kid's blow, and it was a pitiful sight. Rosetta started laughing maliciously and praising the kid, saying that he was amazing. Artie realized that the cult exterminator wasn't moving. Will was very surprised by this, and at the same moment the demon jumped up from his seat while the mask flew off his face. The guys didn't understand what was wrong with him, because he should have disappeared by now. The clothes on the destroyer began to tear, and Artie shouted for everyone to get away from him and drew her sword. The exterminator became super muscular, and one of his arms was enlarged several times, and he instantly broke Artie's sword in half. She started to get angry, but was glad that he finally showed up. The demon bared his terrible grin and growled. And at that moment, the devil himself rose up in front of the guys. His muscles looked like they were going to burst. He wanted to thank them all because he was able to be reborn only because of them. Will reflected on the fact that he had already encountered a demon, and, of course, he has experience fighting evil spirits in a previous life, but he somehow missed the moment when the devil is reborn after the vessel disappears. But right now, Will was only in the body of a small child. The girls next to him were embarrassed by his inaction, and she turned to him. But the guy immediately jumped towards the devil because he decided to try to attack him anyway. Due to his speed, a strong wind appeared behind him. The devil started laughing, and a guy's foot flew into his head. The devil's head was too hard. The demon grabbed the boy's leg, saying that it was not so easy for him to give up. The head of the cult was holding his leg with great force, and he said with a terrible grin that he could crush Will like a bug. After all, his childish curiosity played a cruel joke on him. The guy didn't understand what he was going to do. The devil shouted in an underground voice, throwing Will directly to the floor, saying that he would quickly turn him into mincemeat. Tina screamed, worried about Will, and Artie asked me to help her. Attacks flew towards the devil, which angered him even more, and he called Artie stupid. She tried to launch even more attacks, but her strength was almost not enough. The devil laughed even more and said it wouldn't help. His eyes turned black as night. He turned back to Artie with a grin, thinking that she thought that if she cut him in half and the matter would be over. At the same moment, the devil looked at his hand and was very surprised. The limb was missing from its usual place. Will, who was standing behind the devil, began to say that although his skin was very hard, it could be cut. Besides, his body was very weak right now. The girls happily exclaimed the boy's name. Will thought they were going to kill him now. The devil sat holding his hand and didn't understand how he could do that. He also didn't understand what he had done. His face was full of anger. Will, with the same smirk and self-confidence, said that he just found out that he was as mortal as they were. The devil started baring his teeth and getting angry and growling. The devil grew a hand and asked this boy not to be arrogant. After all, he was stronger than them in many ways, and now he was going to destroy them all. At the same moment, the monster's head flew off to the side, but the grin still remained vicious. Will was holding a lightsaber in his hand, and there was a strong gust of wind from such an attack. Will turned to the girls, a little scared. They stood there completely unaware of what had happened. The devil collapsed behind them. Tina and Rosetta admired Will's reception, and he thanked them modestly. Artie said in frustration that he had just destroyed her as a swordsman. Will began to feel very embarrassed and apologized to her. But suddenly, Tina noticed something. The devil's body began to change its shape, and it looked like it was melting. As it turned out, Will noticed that it was dissolving and turning into liquid, and steam was coming out of the chopped place. The guy approached the girl because he thought she might know what it was. Artie didn't know what it meant, and she also didn't think it was anything good. The guy thought about it. He used freezing magic, but he thought he should be frozen. The demon was still melting before my eyes. The guy decided to use thunder and later fire and wind, which also turned out to be useless. He ended up trying the water. And finally, it seemed to him that the water magic seemed to be working. After all, it looked like the monster had shrunk, because the areas where the water got turned black. Tina suggested that this was an indicator that everything was working. Then he decided to continue, but the devil began to emit sounds and change in shape. Suddenly, a plate broke. It was Saria, who was sitting in the children's room. Some girl wanted to know if she was okay, and Saria herself said that her plate suddenly split. The girl who was looking after the children was scared and worried. She thought that Saria had hurt herself, because she was very sorry that it had happened. The girl took the girl by the cheeks, and she said a little crestfallen that she was fine. As it turned out, Soraya saw her brother. He was all wet and serious, but then she saw his past life instead of her brother who was fighting with someone, and suddenly her brother had wings. And Soraya realized that he was a Tenebris. He was standing in front of her, and it was as if there was a reflection of someone behind him, someone with 4 wings. It was time for the guys to defeat the strongest enemy. Artie was ready for a fight and held a sword in her hands. A Tenebris appeared in front of Will, namely a large wolf that had wings and a third eye. He couldn't believe it because it couldn't be him. The beast was small in stature, and it was different in shape. He thought they might be related. After all, the real Tenebris had a 9-foot head, a 6-foot tail, and 3-foot magnifiers. But Will also didn't understand why he wasn't attacking, and maybe he was afraid to approach him since he had a beast god, or else he basically didn't want to engage him in battle. But Tenebris was no longer looking at Will, but at Rosetta, who was looking strangely at an incomprehensible wolf. The girl did not understand why this happened. She was shocked, or rather scared. After all, not long ago, this Tenebris was a monster. He was so powerful that his strength couldn't be compared to anyone else. Suddenly, Rose was addressed. Or rather, Will was calling her and Tina. They didn't understand what had happened. The guy ordered them to return to the academy immediately and ask for help while he would try to detain him. Rosetta said it was too risky. But Will was unfazed, saying that they were the ones in danger, but he would be fine. Tina also tried to object, but the guy also interrupted her, again asking them to run and call for help as soon as possible. Memories of her friend flashed through Tina's mind again, asking her to think about how much he needed her help. And at the same moment, the girl's eyes filled with tears, and she began to think that she would not make it. Rosetta called out to her, saying that they should listen to Will. Tina turned around in fright and said the girl's name. Then, already running away from the guy, she asked him not to disappear. Will told her that everything was fine, and he promised that he would come back alive. The girls ran away from the guy in frustration in order to be able to help him. The guy could use the ring to contact Zenobia, but he didn't know how long he could hold out while they ran for help. The guy was holding a ring in his hands, and a spatial seal appeared from it, and he was talking to Zenobia. He said it was Will, and he said they were attacked by a beast, and they were fighting it now. The voice from the ring did not believe what he said. Will repeated, saying that it seemed to be a Tenebris, namely a monster of catastrophes, or this one was probably one of his children. They told him from the ring that they would come right away and asked him to wait for them, because safety comes first. Artie said it was a ring, and a voice she thought she heard, and that voice was the teacher's. Will said that he would explain everything to her a little later. In the meantime, they need to focus on the enemy. Artie agreed and started fighting again. Will said he couldn't let her fight alone. At the same time, the guy put his hand to her broken sword and thought about it. After all, the girl was powerless before the monster of disasters, and an ordinary sword could not help here. He needed to strengthen it somehow. The girl blushed at the guy's actions and was very embarrassed. Suddenly, at that moment, the girl had a whole new sword instead of a broken one. She was happy about it, and the guy immediately explained that he had made it in a hurry, but he thought that the sword would not let her down in battle. Artie immediately thanked him. And finally, a real Tenebris appeared in front of them. Will wanted to make sure that the girl was ready, because they had to defeat him together. There was a slime and a goat behind them, and Artie readily agreed. Will prepared himself, and said that now this monster of catastrophes cannot escape from them. The guy used a Deathblade spell, which caused Tenebris to become an evil monster, which he had not been before. And then suddenly, 2 monsters of catastrophes ran at them. Their grin was vicious and also exuded mockery. Artie thought it was impossible, but the guy asked her to wait a bit. The guy used the seal, right on the ground. He wanted to use the hands of the earth now, and at the same moment, hands began to appear from the ground, which clung to the paws of Tenebris. The guy exclaimed that they had caught him. At the same moment, heavenly arrows flew from the sky, heading straight for the disaster monsters. Artie exclaimed, a little incredulous that they were able to immobilize him. The zebra began to howl, and then steam appeared from its nostrils, and it began to growl. And then the zebra began to growl even harder, and a bright light began to emanate from it. The hands that were coming out of the ground began to involuntarily release the monster of catastrophes. Will said that this monster was able to destroy all magic with just a flap of its wings. Will wasn't going to let him leave any scratches on his body. The guy summoned the seal, thereby stopping the monster of disasters. It was hard for the guy to hold back the seal, and it was already beginning to crumble. He felt a little surprised, because at that moment the monster began to writhe. It began to make scary sounds similar to the bleating of a goat. Well, as it turned out, it was the baby goat that attacked Tinnabrawl. Will immediately praised him. The guy looked at the recent little goat and saw a huge animal instead of the past one. He immediately exclaimed indignantly. He drew attention to the slime, adding to his words that they had become so big. Artie thought about it and realized that it was a matter of competition. Will's animals immediately started making their own noises. They began to surround the disaster monster from several sides, thereby defeating it. The guy said that with such a force, they might not be needed here anymore. The monster's eyes widened. He opened his mouth and threw the slime and goat away from him. Well, as it turned out, the guy's animals hit each other. The monster stared angrily at the animals that had just been hit, and Artie immediately began to protect them, asking the disaster monster not to touch them. She started telling the monster that otherwise he would lose his paws. He started growling and looking at the girl. Artie contemptuously said that he was pathetic, and at the same moment glowing lights flew at her, from which she began to squeal. Will immediately ran up to her, tell her her name, and the girl apologized, saying that she simply did not see them while she was sitting on the ground, leaning on her arm. The guy realized that he had touched her with the help of a fog spell, and also hoped that their magic was not cursed and she would be fine. He realized that he was not dangerous and was insanely agile. Therefore, it was necessary to come up with something, otherwise they could lose. Will thought about using another magic. At the same time, he remembered his brothers. He grinned at the same time and realized that he needed to try. After all, if you combine the magic of water, earth, and air, you will get a winning magic. He sent this volley towards the disaster monster. As soon as he was hit by this volley, he realized that it was a water trap that completely covered his eyes. The guy said that he deliberately threw the magic of the earth of water on the muzzle to deprive him of sight and hearing. At the same time, he began to mock the disaster monster because he couldn't attack it. He also told him not to try to clean it up. After all, even the magic of the mist won't help him because his abilities are as strong as his own. Water magic neutralizes, allowing the energy of the disaster monster to come out. The guy remembered the fight with his brothers, and Will had no choice but to do it. The mouth of the disaster monster began to light up with a bright light, and the Tenebral began to dissolve. He's been waiting for this for so long. The monster's eyes began to widen, and eventually it began to howl. Foam began to flow from the Tenebral's mouth, and his grin became even more vicious than before. The pores penetrated his body, spreading the poison. This spell will spread for a long time, paralyzing every inch of his carcass. But Will didn't understand what it was like to swallow his power. Timberbrawl began to emit burning lights again, and Will began to defend himself, using the shield consisting of a seal again. He understood that he would not be able to put up much protection due to the control of another force. The guy could barely hold the seal, even though it was already cracking. He felt that he had a little more left, and then he would reach its center. But then, at that moment, Artie had already started attacking Tynabral's head. Her sword went straight through the center of the disaster monster. Will shouted the girl's name, and she shouted at him without turning around that she would distract him. Will's huge goat stuck its horns into the Tynabral's torso, and the slime appeared exactly on the paw of the disaster monster, thereby turning it black. Saddened, Will said that they had all come to his aid together. The guy was still holding the finger that held the seal. At the same time, he finally said that he still had a little more time to hold out. And then suddenly, he realized something. He found what he was looking for. With the last of his strength, he told the disaster monster that he would destroy its power. At the same time, the guy smiled that he had found a way out. Tynabral glowed, and a stream of blood flowed from his mouth. He was down and lying on the ground. Will looked at him with a little fury. He did not understand why this had happened. After all, he had reached its center, but he only wanted to destroy the force, and he didn't think it would destroy the beast. After all, his hide was quite durable. Will thought about it and said that in any case, that duel with the stupid brothers had only done him good. Images of those boys who were pretending to be I don't know who appeared in his head again. The guy realized that Artie needed to be treated urgently because she was seriously injured. The girl realized that he had put a curse on her. She held on to her wound, trying to make sure of her words. Will stretched out his hand towards Artie, and a field appeared around her, which began to heal her. The girl realized that his magic was very strong, which confused the guy. Artie continued by saying that this beast was insanely strong, and she couldn't defeat him even with a weapon. He remembered the little girl who told the master that she had failed. although the demon had no arms or legs. Will chuckled and said Zenobia had a decent student. He patted Artie on the head and said it wasn't a big deal because the most important thing was that it was all over. The girl awkwardly turned to the guy. Behind the boy's back was his past life, which told her that if she understood this, then in the future she would definitely become a strong warrior. Artie blushed deeply and tried to address the guy again. He was shocked because he remembered little Zenobia. Immediately, he tried to change the subject, trying to find out where her sword was. The girl said a little awkwardly that her sword was slightly damaged, but for that, she easily controlled him. The metal in this sword was very durable and light, it had a beautiful pattern and had a very strong magic power, and the shape is very comfortable, so it was convenient for her to hold it in her hands. And at that moment, Artie, pausing a little between the letters because she was trying to say something, and after her words, there was an awkward pause. Will said, without giving the girl anything to say, that he was giving her this sword, as long as she didn't ask anything. Will noticed that the goat and the slime had become regular shapes, and it was good that they were all finally behind us. The guy was lying on the ground, trying to catch his breath. He was terribly tired, Artie sitting next to him saying that she was tired too. The girl thanked Will for his help, and the sword that the guy had made for her was intact again. Finally, the heroes can now rest. Will and Artie were able to defeat the disaster monster. They noticed that his body had turned to ashes, leaving only the core. Artie couldn't believe that they could defeat him just because his weak point was water magic. Will thought about it, because he fought on equal terms and could resist any of his techniques. After all, he didn't have a weak spot, just something gave way in his body and they were able to attack him, dealing a fatal blow. Suddenly, a wing appeared from the core, which was split, which made the guys pay attention to it again. Several dragons emerged from the egg. Will didn't understand where they came from, and Artie just stood there wondering what to do now. At the same moment, the master's disciples appeared in the sky. At that moment, Rosetta and Tina were trying to get help faster. Rosa was just trying to hurry Tina up. The girl said that she couldn't keep up with her and asked for a rest. Another one reminded them about the monster, and they need to run further to help. And if they don't hurry up, they will be destroyed. Tina immediately started imagining it and didn't want it to happen. Suddenly, an appeal to the girls was heard from somewhere. The appeal was repeated, and Tina told Rosetta that she could hear them calling their names. Suddenly, voices were heard from somewhere above, which attracted the attention of the girls. Rosa looked up angrily, and Tina was worried, but then the girl's expression changed to cheerful. On the treetops, or rather above them, there were 2 dragons, on which were Will, Artie, Zenobia, and Milt. And, after all that had happened, they were already sitting in the director's office. Milt wanted to hear a detailed account of what had happened to them in the woods. Suddenly, Zenobia turned to Rosetta and Tina, saying that she hadn't even introduced the old man to them, admitting it was her mistake and asking them to get to know each other. After all, there was no time to do this at the enlightenment ceremony. This angered Milt. The girl introduced Milt to the girls, and Milt mentally reproached her for being older than him after all. But the girl continued, saying that he was one of the directors and a very strong magician. Rosetta and Tina were shocked by this news, and one of them said it was a great honor for them to meet him. Milt laughed, saying that it was possible without such formalities. After all, he had heard a lot about Tina, and if he was not mistaken, then she and Artie were recommended as Zenobia's best students. At the same time, Milt greatly praised the girls. Tina felt very embarrassed by the director's support. Milt turned to Rosetta. After all, he had also heard about her that she was just an excellent hunter, and such people were very highly valued at their school. The girl was shocked by such praise, saying that she was not such an excellent hunter. Zenobia asked me to tell her what happened, and she turned to Rosetta and Tina. They started saying that there was a huge bear, and the other one, interrupting, said that it was a wolf demon, which was terrible and also with huge wings. Tina and Rosetta shared that the damage caused to livestock in Rose's hometown, and the story of the demon, which has not yet been revealed. And then there was the fight with the demon and the appearance of Tenebris. Rosetta heard about Tenebris because she couldn't believe her ears. Tina confirmed that she had said that. After all, Will had said his name himself when he saw this monster. Will laughed awkwardly, saying that he wanted to talk about it. Zenobia and Milt repeated the name of Tenebris because he was a powerful monster. After all, the Calamity Beast and Tenebris weren't really monsters that other magicians knew about. The Calamity Beast had been destroyed by him and his disciples, but it seemed to him that some people, such as the Seekers, knew about it. The great master and his disciples defeated a powerful demon king who wanted to destroy humanity, and it looked like the Guardian army was skillfully manipulating this information, carefully hiding it. Zenobia didn't know what to do now. Milt replied that she was giving orders here, so she had the floor, and the man was angry. The girl thought about it and said that they had no choice but to omit it and classify their trip, because each of them signed an oath of non-disclosure. Will thought about the fact that it turns out he also signed similar papers, but he couldn't even remember this. Memories of signing papers flashed through his mind. Zenobia said that what they were talking about now would not go beyond the office. As soon as they know about what happened to them in the forest, that's what Will thought. He thought that Tinebris and the Beast of Calamity were the names of the Demon King who had once been defeated by the Great Master and his disciples, and those bandits who attacked them then were his loyal followers. The rescue agency was created specifically to destroy and combat this cult, and not a single living soul knew what secrets the keepers kept. Zenobia assumed that Tina had been told everything by her teacher, and Will kept thinking that it was a good thing that he didn't talk about the resurrection of the beast and his real identity. Rosetta, with a serious face, said that she had also been told about it, and she thought that the truth was special. Zenobia said they needed someone with her abilities, so they went to her for help. The girl blushed and laughed awkwardly. Will realized that Rosetta and Tina were incredibly similar to each other. But Rosetta didn't understand what about Artie and Will. Zenobia was drinking something from a mug and didn't know how to properly present the information. In the end, she said, they found out about it beforehand, because they were students of their academy and had heard that they needed help. Will laughed awkwardly, but Artie sat speechless. Tina realized that this was why he was so prepared in battle. Rosetta picked up on her words because they knew everything and didn't even tell them anything about it. Will thought about what he would say, that he was a 200-year-old man and also an apostle. Zenobia said that now that they had everything figured out, she now wanted to hear from Will and Artie, or rather a detailed report from the place where the demon was destroyed. The guys confirmed it. And she began to report the report. The directors listened to them attentively and they were interested, because they had hunted him before, but had never seen anything like it. Mild said that there were cases when a person became a demon, but this was the first time he had seen that the one who had already disappeared became a demon, or the original form of a demon became a demon of a higher rank, and he needed to think about it carefully. Zenobia thought it would be silly, but she asked to stay here for a while and not go outside the building. Tina immediately agreed. Will understood them because they were afraid and didn't know what to do. Even though it was a high-ranked demon, only he and Artie knew its true form, and the rest were caught off guard. And he didn't believe they had gotten rid of the monster for good. After all, even if it happens that Tina does not inherit the throne, then the Empire would in no way help to lose her as the crown princess. The bear demon remained alive, but Tinebris escaped. Milt was trying to get in touch with someone, but their phone was just hissing, and he finally got in touch with someone, and that person could be heard. Milt turned to Will and Rosetta, because there was an urgent matter and he needed their help. Will was trying to figure out what had happened. He replied that they had opponents on the horizon, stronger than Tinebris. Tina wanted to find out who it was, but Rosetta considered it impossible. Will didn't understand why he and Rosetta were the only ones called on for this assignment. The crying cries of little girls could be heard. They were the sisters of Will and Rosetta who were running to meet them. The girls jumped into their arms. The teacher apologized and said they couldn't hold them anymore. After all, they were so worried that they asked to see them as soon as possible. Will also apologized and said that they had caused them too much trouble. Soraya wanted to know that her brother was okay, because she was very worried about him. Will apologized to her for making her worry, and he was fine. And only the clothes were slightly tattered. It scared the little sister. The guy said he got a little carried away when he was playing with a goat and a baby bear. The girl was shocked when she heard about the bear and the goat. She repeated his words that he was playing with them. The guy apologized, but immediately added that now they have a new family member. The girl rolled her eyes in disbelief, and the bleating of a goat was heard in the room, as well as Soraya's joyful exclamation. In Will's room, Soraya was asking the goat to give her a paw. At the same time, the girl gave him a name, and now his name is Beliash. He put his paw on her head and started bleeding. Will started laughing at the ridiculous picture. The girl did not give up and asked to repeat the goat again. She asked me to look at her hand and repeat after her. All of their beasts possessed divine power. In his memories there was Rune, who also put his paw on Soraya's head. She was crazy about them, and it seemed that she liked the kid. Will remembered that Soraya had named her pet Whitey. and the goat seems to have settled in too. And he no longer seemed like a dangerous animal, although he sometimes shows his temper by butting into Will's leg. He did not understand why he was doing this, because he was not his enemy. It was all good, of course. He was interrupted from his thoughts by a knock on the door. Someone was asking to come in the door. It was Artie, and Will let her in. The girl said they needed to hurry up, and the guy said he was on his way. Suddenly, the girl was dumbfounded. She hadn't expected to see so many animals in the room. All the animals made their sounds in greeting. Will smiled awkwardly and said that Soraya thought they had too few animals, and he needs to take her to the nursery. Artie said she'd see them off. The guy understood that perhaps this was Zenobia's order, but she shouldn't worry and she shouldn't go after him, but rather wait here. She said she wanted to go there herself. Soraya wanted to go with Will and Artie's sister. The girl smiled and turned to Will's sister, saying that she would accompany them. The guy said they had to hurry now. Milt talked to Will, realizing that he was in the body of a little boy and his magic power was weak and a little unstable. The man still did not understand how they were able to split the core into two halves. Will also thought it was impossible. But thanks to the help of the guys and Artie's distraction, he was able to focus and direct his power against the demon. In addition, he saw that the water magic was negatively working on the demon, blocking its actions, but the Beast of Calamity was trying to redirect energy to it in order to do something. Before that, they didn't know anything about the demon's weaknesses. Will understood everything, but he didn't understand that they couldn't work out his actions and at least roughly find out what kind of power the monster of disaster had. And anyway, thanks to them, we finally managed to find out. Milt confirmed his thoughts. And he added that he had one suggestion for them and 3 requests. Will was surprised by this, but he waited for the man to tell him. He said that, first of all, could they help him in the investigation of the disaster monster and his henchmen? Will said he didn't mind cooperating. Milt said that Will could use his office whenever he wanted, because the necessary papers and documents were stored there, and the poet's work would become much easier. And he'll tell them later when they start investigating. Will understood and thanked me. He also decided to talk about requests. He would like Artie to become his teacher, since he and she need constant practice. The guy said he didn't mind, moving around the school would be much freer. Will said that someone might suspect that he, being the best student with the divine beasts, was training with the girl. Zenobia was feeding the animals, and Milt said that in order to confirm the animals, educational guidelines are needed. They need to train harder to gain the necessary skills. There are many applicants who want to work with them. Will thought it was reasonable, but so that everyone mistakenly perceived the measurement results as their abilities. Milt said we could move on to the second request. They wanted to know something. Will wondered what exactly he wanted to tell him. Milt wanted to know what Rosetta's abilities were as a potential hunter. Will replied that she was a very good hunter, and the way she found and tracked the tracks of wild creatures seemed amazing to him. And yes, even though she doesn't have much experience in combat, she's great with a bow, and she also has a nice personality, and she always feels compassion for her sister and friends. Zenobia marveled at the girl. She thought they were really a great 4-person team, and they just balance each other well, using every power. Will was a magician, Artie was a swordsman, Tina was a healer, Rosetta was a hunter. Will confirmed his words, saying that he also wants to work with them in the future. Milt thanked him, saying they appreciated it. The guy asked the man what the third request was, because he thought that was all he wanted to talk about. But the man continued, saying that they would like to talk more about Rosetta, or rather, about her future stay here. Will didn't know what he was talking about. He wanted Rosetta to become Regina's student, because Regina had no equal in possession of weapons. She is an excellent archer and swordsman. Will understood everything, but he didn't understand what was wrong with that. Milt said irritably that it was bad that Regina wasn't taking students. Will blushed, realizing that this was about the girl. The man agreed, saying that it would take a long time to tell the reason. Will waited for an explanation. The man said that the story happened 90 years ago, and then she had one student. Regina loved and respected him very much, devoting all her free time to him. And one day, her hometown and their country were attacked by demons. While Regina was protecting the people of his homeland, he was protecting the country by acting as a human shield and keeping the demons away from the gates of the building. After some time, they returned back and defeated the demon. But it was too late, as the student suffered a fatal wound. And after seeing how Regina defeated the demon, he disappeared with a smile on his face. She raised a really strong student. Then, on the day of that battle, he was by his side and saw everything with his own eyes. But the demons are too strong to deal with them alone. The enemies had deliberately planned everything so that Regina would be absent while they dealt with her beloved student. After that, her only words were that she would never take students again. Will wanted to know if he was sure Rosetta could be trusted with her, or what his request was. Milt said she was understandable. She had lost her best student, and he should know what it was like to lose a friend he had fought with. Zenobia said they had to do something to get her back. It's been a long time since then. The request is that they talk to her and ask her to take Rosetta as a student. Will understood why they had told him this story, so that he could help bring Regina back, because the grief of losing his beloved student, he himself was once a master, so like no one else, he understood her feelings. And that's why Will decided to agree and talk to her. Milt beamed at his master's response, but he asked not to expect much from their conversation. But the man still believed that the master's words would find a response in Regina's heart. Will wanted to make sure that was all they wanted to tell him. Milt confirmed and thanked him for listening to him. The guy decided to remind them of what they had talked about earlier. Suddenly, Zenobia said she wanted to get started immediately and wanted to ask Milt if she could use his room to investigate. This confused the man, and he did not know what to say to her. In the end, she suggested that he at least clean up his office first, because he had so much junk there and the master would not even be able to find the papers he needed. This greatly angered Milt. He turned to the girl and said that there were a lot of necessary things in his office that should not be thrown away. Zenobia sarcastically said that she was wondering what kind of things they were. There was an awkward pause and silence fell in the office. Will informed the guys that he would contact them a little later, even though he always said in his previous life that everything should be organized. With a little anger, he said that the next time he came to this office, it would be good if the investigation room was clean and the necessary things were hidden away. Milt was embarrassed and said that he understood everything and apologized. Will went through the door and saw a girl who was waiting for him. It was Artie, and her appearance surprised the guy a lot, but the girl was unperturbed. The guy realized that she had been waiting for him here all the time. The girl said he shouldn't worry about it because it was part of his assignment. The guy exhaled from impotence against her. Will reached out to Artie because he wanted to ask her if she had a minute. It was a place that looked like a dining room, and the guys were sitting in it. The guy started talking and said that even though he had talked about it earlier, she didn't have to follow him around. Artie thought it annoyed him, but he said that wasn't the point. She looked at him for a long time with a serious face, which embarrassed the guy. The guy started to address the girl, thus embarrassing her now. But there's actually something he'd like to ask her. Finally, the guy said he didn't understand why she was so desperate to get close to him, and he was really interested in finding out. The girl immediately started apologizing and saying that it wasn't what he could have thought of. He confusedly said that he hadn't thought about anything like that, but it just became interesting. Artie was very worried about him. Will thought that these experiences were not accidental. She knows who Tenebris is because she was sure Zenobia had definitely told her about him. When he attacked them, he was too carried away to say anything about him. Artie knew everything about Will and this monster. The girl was embarrassed by her words. She thought she really should apologize for finding out his secret that he had been keeping all this time. Will asked me not to apologize because everything was fine. Will turned to Artie again because there was something else she didn't know about him. To be more precise, his real name. The girl thought that Will was not his real name. The guy said his name was Edelphus Worms, and that was his name in a previous life. Artie turned to Will again, realizing that he was the right master. Will said that she might not believe him, but other teachers could confirm it, as they had all been his students in the past. But to his surprise, the girl said she believed him. She was very surprised, but she felt that he was an unusual person. He was surprised that she believed his words so quickly. She explained that cases of reincarnation in their time are very rare, but they have been, and even confirmed. It was much less common for a person to retain his memory from a previous life. It was impossible that an 8-year-old boy could defeat the strongest magicians or powerful demons so easily. It was logical that only a great master could handle them. Will said that he had defeated them all only because of her help. The girl remembered something else and decided to find out, thinking that animals are also divine. The guy confirmed it and said that he just wanted to talk about them. He wanted to tell me that a goddess had made him like this. Artie thought he must be a favorite of the gods. Then he told Artie how he had come from his death to the present day. The girl did not understand what kind of divine guardians, beasts, and half-breeds they were, and I realized that it was all true. Will explained that ordinary animals would not be able to possess such power, so everything was obvious. The guy said that everything he had just told them was now their secret, and no one except Zenobia and the other teachers knows about it. Artie asked me not to worry, because she wouldn't tell anyone, but she didn't understand why he told her. He said it was because he trusted her as he trusted himself. The girl was very confused by this answer, and even though she is one of the rescuers, he saw how she risked her life for his sake. Artie said that's what anyone would do if they were in her shoes. The guy was embarrassed and silent, but then he turned to Artie because he had one request. The girl began to listen to him attentively. He wanted her to fight the monster of disaster with him. Will wanted a decent man standing next to him, fighting evil just like 100 years ago. The girl thought about it, because she would be next to the master and knowing all his background. She took a short pause and said that it was a great honor for her to participate in the battle with the great master, and she would do her best not to let him down. Will thanked Artie and said he really wanted her to continue treating him like Will, not a master. She just said, "Whatever you say, Will," and I hoped that they would work well together. The guy wanted to know how she felt about working out today. Artie agreed and said she could show him a couple of new tricks. Suddenly, outside the door, someone was looking for Will because they needed to tell him something. There was Tina and Rosetta, who were upset about something. They found out that he wanted them to join him. There were already 4 cups of tea on the table. Will said that they had very good training, and he had already seen this several times, both during the entrance exams and in the forest when they rescued him. The girls train every day, but they didn't understand why he was suddenly suggesting that they team up. Tina wasn't very good at fighting, so she didn't think she was much use. Rosa is also not in the physical shape she can be in, and in their last mission they had to run for help, and they couldn't help them. He knew that they would quickly agree to his proposal, and he invited them to listen to him because he wanted to do something, namely to unite with them so that in the future they can defeat the monster of disaster and other demons. To do this, they must constantly train to improve their skills in magic. And it turned out that he wanted to gather them all to destroy the monster of disaster. Will said with a serious face that they understood correctly. Even if they don't have time to get together and train, schoolwork will be enough to gain knowledge and improve their tactics. Tina is also Dion's student, so she's in good hands. He was a little confused. It's not that he doesn't trust them, but unlike Artie, Tina and Rosetta are academy students who have nothing to do with the Salvation Army yet. Tina was a princess, and Rosetta has a sister. And if there are disasters during the battle with the beast, something will happen to them. Will's thoughts were interrupted by Tina, who was puzzled by something. She said she wasn't strong enough to fight. She often got confused and ran away, hiding in the bushes, and was simply useless in battles. The girl said she couldn't forgive herself for that. But this time she wanted to overcome her fears and help Will fight the monster. She wanted to take a chance and prove to herself that she was strong and could stand up for her friends, protecting them from the monster of disaster. Rosetta thought exactly the same way as Tina, so she agreed with every word she said. She wanted to help Will and fight side by side against the demon. Because if they invade their lands, innocent people may suffer, and if anything happened to her sister, she would never forgive herself. Therefore, she wants to become stronger and wants to protect not only Rose but also Will because they are friends. And that meant they had to help each other. The guy was amazed by how excited they were. He apologized for putting pressure on them with his requests, but he was pleased that they all decided to help and support him. Still, he wanted to ask them again, even though he already knew the answer. Did he want to make sure that they would team up with him to fight the disaster beast? The girls happily said that they were friends and of course they would help. Will said they can start training right now. The girls immediately agreed with this. All of this brought back old memories to him when his students, as children, also stood next to him. He knew he was lucky. First, the girls had to try to defeat Will using only hand-to-hand combat. He encouraged the girls and waited for them to attack. The girls weren't ready for this. Regina said that her work was over for today and it was time for her to get back, and also to teach a lesson to the boy who decided to present himself as a master. At the same moment in the training hall, a clear hit was made on the target. Rosetta was shooting it, and behind her back, Will was praising her, saying she was doing great. He didn't think that now she needed to spend so much magic power to hit the target. Rosetta awkwardly thanked him, and the techniques Will taught him in his training sessions came in handy in many ways. The same training sessions that he started just a week ago. Previously, he trained at Worm's Manor, his birthplace, every day. Normally, when the magic power inside the body continues to circulate, the body moves. On the other hand, magic is wasted. The circulation adapts and accelerates. At the same time, the control of magic power has also improved. Behind Will and Rosetta, there was the sound of blows. It was Tina who used fireballs. She hit all the targets with all the charges and hoped that Will saw it. The guy said he saw it, and she did it cool. The guy's gaze went to the last girl, or rather to Artie, who was running at high speed and pulling out a sword. She hit all the targets in different places. The girl exhaled, and Will began to smile broadly because that's what he expected from Artie, namely, excellent swordsmanship. At first, all the movement was also clumsy. However, with the addition of magic power, the situation stabilized. Artie said she was in great shape today. Rosetta was smiling, and, just as she thought, the two of them were so strong. Will asked her not to worry about it because she was making progress on her own. Besides, the two people here have advantages due to the fact that they are the disciples of the great sages. That's why everything is fine now, and she doesn't have to worry about it. The girl thought about it, because she did not expect to hear such a thing addressed to her. Will also told Tina that she was making no progress in controlling magic. She has the power of fireballs, and her shooting accuracy is in poor condition. The girl did not expect that her powers would not be praised, unlike the others. And Tina realized that Will had used magic power in that fight, and the guy immediately confirmed it. Then Will talked to Artie again, who asked the master about close combat, and the guy supported her. He said that Artie had mastered magic power brilliantly, but if she trained, she would be able to use it just as skillfully to strengthen her body. The girl understood everything, and for this purpose she will do everything possible. And then he decided to find out how she liked her new sword. The girl immediately said that the weight and length were such that they met all her needs. The sword was magnificent and felt like it was part of her body. When destroying the Makuma, namely the demon bear, the sword became very easy to use. Due to the fact that he made it in a hurry, its quality would drop along with its durability every time he used it. Will said that she could be proud of this sword now. After all, this sword is an improvisation, one of the ideas. In considering this, she should be more attentive to the details. He made the sword carefully, choosing the materials so that it would fit all the fights. Artie understood his fiction, but she was interested in something else. Namely, where did he find such materials for this sword? The smart young man and the swordmaster enthusiastically joined forces, and it was like a sword on the same level as the legendary one. The production control was Zenobia. The production itself was Edelfus, sponsored by Milt Resources. Will said that he was far from such a thing. The girl felt sorry, because she thanked her terracing for such a short time. The guy was surprised that the girl named the sword. He thought about it. As expected of a swordmaster according to his position, he also equipped himself with weapons. Before using Artie's sword, it was necessary to learn how to use it as well. In the early days, it is better to develop magical powers. Will was thinking about taking advantage of Rosetta's offer and having a great time with her. However, if the wizards are better than the master blacksmiths with this case, Artie thought about the blacksmith's house, created by a man from books. Will didn't understand why this particular sword's name was terracing. As Will expected, the sword filled in the name. Rosetta looked at Artie and was amazed at her movements. She wasn't sure she was capable of the same success. The next day came. Tina ran towards Will and greeted him. "There should be interesting lessons starting today," Tina said enthusiastically. Rosetta agreed and said they were going to have a good time. Tina's goal was to become #1 in the medicine classes. Rosetta offered to go with them. Will thought again, because by some miracle they had chosen the same electives. Tina asked Will if he had received his assignments. The guy didn't know what to say to her. After all, I'll only have to do something for the exam at the end of the semester. It amazed the girls. Tina said, frustrated, that they wouldn't be doing assignments together anymore, and Rosetta was just waiting for this. The guy now began to feel guilty. Rosetta and Artie were so different. The seller thought she might want to buy a new sword. Artie expected this from Will. The lessons at the academy were now a priority. Will had slain the beast with such skill, and now it seemed he wasn't going to use it. To be honest, Rosetta wasn't sure she was capable of the same success. At the same time, in the director's office, the guy announced that Will Worms was here. He was told to come in, and the guy thought he was being approached informally. Slime and a goat immediately tried to run into the door, and the guy tried to stop them, and then something caught his attention. There was someone else sitting on the couch. Will was addressed as Will Worms. The guy confirmed that it was him and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, calling the unknown Regina. The girl slammed her hand on the table, asking him to back off because she was talking to him. Will laughed and told her that she was as shallow as she was. The girl was shocked by his words. She told him to shut up and called him a brute. The girl was addressed by name to silence her. It was Dion, who told Will that in his new life he had questioned Milt and Zenobia about various stories in detail. Will told Dion in response that it had been a long time, namely 100 years ago. The guy wanted him to understand that. After all, he thought that about 100 years ago he was 2 meters tall. Dion laughed and said that if it was like that 100 years ago, a lot has changed since then. Will grinned and said that was true, because everything had changed so much in 100 years that he was still amazed. Regina shouted at Dion not to get too close to him, and then she flew up to the guy, grabbing him by the collar. She said he could fool Zenobia and Milt, but he wouldn't fool her. The magical animals began to make their sounds, and Zenobia sadly watched as the master and Regina quarreled. The guy turned to Fury, and Beliash, saying that everything was fine, and she's a friend, not an enemy. The girl thought that he was going to continue impersonating the master, but he interrupted her, saying that he was their master. Then the girl asked to prove it, and Will gladly agreed. The guy remembered that Regina must remember the promise she made to him as a child. The girl asked, startled, and the memory of making a promise flashed through her mind. Her promise sounded like she would definitely become strong, and she promised it. Will said she gave him her word to take good care of her guns. Regina was furious and didn't understand what to make of it, because he was 5 years old at the time. And yet, out of curiosity, she snuck into his laboratory, and when she saw stuffed marine animals, she was scared and burst into tears. The girl called Will a master and said that he had promised to keep it a secret. But that didn't prove anything, the guy said mockingly. And he also decided to remind Zenobia about the sword. She had already asked him to keep quiet. Zenobia didn't understand what was going on. But Regina was already screaming with joy. She burst into tears, hugging the master by the neck. He was trying to tell her that she could calm down. Zenobia turned to the master because she still didn't understand what Regina had done with her sword, but the girl told Will that she missed him a lot. Dion extended his hand and said that he was also glad to see this meeting and was glad that he was okay. Will was very happy about it too. But then, suddenly he said, already turning towards Dion, thinking that it was worth telling another old story so that he would be convinced. He started talking, and Dion said that he had no doubt from the very beginning that this was their master. When they finally met, they were all waiting for Will to tell them what had happened to him over the past 100 years. The guy thought she must have heard the story from Zenobia. She didn't say anything, thinking that they would want to hear firsthand. Regina wanted to hear about how he defeated Tenebris. And I was waiting for a detailed story. The guy couldn't say a word from such a tight hug. The girl grabbed his hand and pulled him onto the sofa so that he could tell her everything. With this gesture, the girl surprised him, because he did not expect such interest in this story. Will did not understand what Regina was doing. She was trying to get enough of the master's presence with a blissful smile and hugged him. But Will didn't understand what else it was. The girl said that he would grow up soon anyway, so she wanted to cuddle their master while he was still small. Puzzled, Will told her to do whatever she wanted. The story was about what happened after Will's reincarnation. When Regina heard this story, she said she would not forgive them for bullying the master, and she was going to destroy the worm's family. Will told her not to worry about him, because as long as they didn't harm others, they could be ignored. The girl sadly agreed with his words. Dion told Regina that those who have the power must be restrained. She knew it, but Dion still unites them all. All of Will's students came to him as children, and he actually raised Dion from an egg, and since he was his first student and the eldest among the others, he always brought them all together. Regina thought they had caused Dion a lot of trouble. He immediately began to deny it because he was just doing his best. Will approached Dion and told him that he was doing well, which surprised the first student. It was obvious that he had worked hard in his absence. At the same time, they thanked him. Dion let a tear run down his cheek. He apologized and explained his tears by saying that he was emotional. Will told him not to think about it, and Beliash immediately began to lick his cheeks, which were salty from tears. Will apologized, saying that he was still a kid. Dion happily said that there was nothing wrong with that, because Beliash was a sweet child, but this did not mean that he could sit on his head, to which Dion said that everything was fine. Milt decided to move on to a conversation about further actions. He was wondering how his meeting with Tina and the girls went. He replied that everything was fine and they had already started training. He also told them that he intended to end the Beast of Calamity. Milt was also interested in the fact that his true identity could be revealed, to which Will replied that he had only told Artie. The guy thought that compared to Artie, Tina wasn't ready for this yet, and it's unlikely that they weren't prepared enough at that moment. It's just that the girls were on a completely different level, unlike Artie, who had already joined the rescue squad, and if they found out, he would have to leave. Dion thanked me for understanding. Will would like to discuss something with Regina, because among the students, the master's wards, there is a hunter named Rosetta. Regina said that she had already heard that name in conversation, and I thought that she had proved herself in the demon hunt. The guy decided to try to offer her to take Rosetta to his students. The girl sadly said that he was talking about it again, and added that he knew that she was not fit to be a teacher, and Milt was more suitable for this role. Milt said he was already listed as the master's teacher. At least on paper, Zenobia was already Artie's teacher, and Dion was Tina's teacher. So now, she was the only one who didn't take a disciple. But even if Milt is just a make-believe master, and he takes Rosetta as a second student, this is an additional burden on him. Will realized that she could be so perceptive. This must have been the atmosphere in which the Council of Sages has been held for the past 100 years, and as their teacher, he was pleased to watch this. Dion agreed with Regina. She didn't even doubt it. Milt shouted Dion's name. However, he also felt that she should take on a student. Regina was upset that he said that. Will realized that this issue had been discussed more than once. Regina was thinking about what she was doing wrong, who should take on a student, and wanted to know what the master thought about it. She didn't think she was someone who could have a student, but the master did not see this as a problem. The girl tried to explain that she was still weak, but Will didn't think so because he thought she was very strong. Dion said that if she wasn't ready, then they were even more so. Regina was worried because what if she got her student into trouble again? Will said that then they would do everything to prevent this from happening. She was sorry that she couldn't do anything back then. Will wondered if that thought was bothering her all the time, and that's why he thinks it's better for her to put her soul into another student now. Regina didn't know if she could, because she was afraid she wasn't ready yet. Will smiled and said she could do anything. He knew what he was saying because he had raised her and asked her to believe him. The girl said that since he thought so, the guy immediately happily said her name. Regina said what it meant, and it was time for her to take on an apprentice. Everyone happily started shouting her name, thus embarrassing her. But she will make the final decision after she personally meets with Rosetta and sees what she is made of. Will said he would have taken her to her place right now, of course, but she was still in class. Regina said she needed to get ready too, so she thought it would be better if it was tomorrow. Milt was very surprised that she needed to prepare. Regina walked down the hallway thinking about Rosetta. She was looking forward to meeting her. It was already such a time that the lessons were over. Tina ran after the hunter and shouted her name, because she wanted to know if she was out of lessons so she could practice. Rosetta said that she had some business to attend to today, and after that she apologized to Tina. She felt sorry that she wouldn't be able to practice, and the girls said goodbye to each other, happily waving their hands. Rosetta thought that if she tried harder, she hoped she wouldn't drag everyone down. 4 guys were standing in front of the director's office. Rosetta was very nervous before meeting with the director. Artie said that one day she would get used to it. But Will scolded Whitey because he started behaving badly when he stopped staying at home. Artie stood in front of the door and said that they were invited by the Madam Director herself. She apologized for waiting and invited them to come into the office. The door rang and opened. Zenobia was sitting at her desk and said that it was good that they had come. The girl was glad to see everyone. Rosetta was surprised that she was glad to see them all, including her. Zenobia turned to someone, saying that she could go out now. An ominous, loud laugh rang out, which confused all the girls. Someone said that they were going to destroy the disaster monster, and Hiyoshiko thanks them for that, and it was she who held a seat on the Council of Sages. It was Regina Itaru's hero, Gracia, here. The girl was wearing armor and had an axe in her hands. Tina and Rosetta began to tremble with fear. She was ready to accept a new rank just to keep destroying. She wanted to know if they had any future plans for Hiyoshiko. Tina curtsied and said that she was glad to meet you, and also introduced herself. She did everything according to all the rules of etiquette, but that's what you'd expect from an emperor's daughter. Regina narrowed her eyes so that it was visible even through her mask. She said that Tina was Dion's student, and she would do her best for her, and she was waiting for some instructions from the girl, but she just thanked her. The girl in the armor couldn't believe it when she saw Rosetta in front of her. She was scared and excited, but she was able to say that she was glad to meet her. The armored knight's eyes shone, scaring the girl even more. Will stepped between Rosetta and Regina to calm the flare-ups between them. Will was laughing in his head, because he knew that Regina was laughing too. After all, her mask had a voice changer function, and therefore it was funny for both of them. Later, the guy looked at Artie, who had a completely straight face, because only one was careless enough. Her eyes stared into the distance so as not to be seen for as long as possible. He felt that she wanted to tear him up, but she was putting up with it. Regina said that her behavior was rude to her, but then she said that, in fact, Sophia recommended that Rosetta be made her student. The girl was shaking. She couldn't believe what she had heard. But of course, it was an honor for her to teach a girl with such talent. Rosetta raised her hands in denial and defense, because the knight's words clearly did not coincide with her opinion. The knight noticed her gaze, even through the narrow slits for her eyes. Rosetta realized that it was all a mistake and Regina was wrong, because someone like her can't become a student of such a teacher. The knight looked confused. She didn't turn her student into a weapon. Suddenly, the robot spoke in a calm voice and jokingly said that it didn't look as bad as the teachers told the students. And now she didn't understand why she refused. And finally, it became clear to her why the student had lost all his fighting spirit. Regina asked me to think about it calmly. Finally, Rosetta turned to the knight, and voices immediately followed her back. Tina noticed that there were two people here. Zenobia said she was pleasantly surprised by Rosetta's behavior and resilience. Everyone in the office was shocked by the director's words. Zenobia turned to Will, remembering what he had said about having tea and sweets. Yes, and Bailey Ash and the truck came. The animals greeted the director, and so cups of tea appeared on the table. Rosetta did not understand why the director recommended her. Has Rosetta decided to subjugate the monster of catastrophes? The girl replied that she did not understand anything, because someone was becoming strong, and someone was not. The girl still thought that she was useless, because everyone's strength was getting higher and higher, and her strength was standing still. Zenobia smiled and said that in that case, she thought Regina's student had the best of everything. Rosetta said that it was possible for the hero's disciple to have two warring deities. Zenobia said that her power does not lie in the blessing of the deities. Will escaped with one of the demon families from the battlefield. Rosetta confirmed her words. But she had one thing, but she never told me about it. She was already made nervous by being put up as a witness. Rosetta became an excellent student. She had real strength and talent, which is accepted by everyone in different ways. Will's animals were sitting at Zenobia's feet, making cute noises. Besides, Regina was waiting for an opportunity to make Rosetta her student. But the director said she would find out the details soon. And to tell the truth, even if she doesn't have talent, she still surpassed herself in the test. Will thought that she had said that Rosetta had made mistakes many times during the preparation. In addition, the director added that she can say for sure that she has no flaws, and she shouldn't rush, but first she needs to think, and therefore already decide. Rosetta happily agreed. Suddenly, Beliashik ran away and got to the suites of the director's mistress, and the goat was called a very greedy boy. After that conversation, two little girls were sleeping in Will's room, and the guys were talking. Tina said it would be great if she became a student. Artie agreed. And Will noticed Rosetta's sad expression and wondered what she was worried about. The girl kept thinking about those beautiful words, about if there is a level of Will's talents, then probably only work will not help her. And to be honest, she doesn't understand how to do it better here. Will suggested talking to the students. Rosetta remembered that Tina had once said that she wasn't going to become an apprentice, and it was the same with Rosetta right now, because she was feeling guilty right now. Zenobia said they were even a little early today, and if they want to meet Dion's student, then they should run for a jog right now. But in fact, Dion was in the organization right now because he was preparing a training session. Rosetta didn't understand what Artie was doing here because she was thinking about something and was extremely focused on her thoughts. She thought it was a little weird. Initially, her father was under the protection of a teacher, but when she was 3 years old, her father disappeared, and at the age of 5, her teacher replaced her parents. Rosetta was shocked by Artie's revelation. The girl added that since then, she has been practicing a lot with swords. At first, Artie loved sword training, then she began to learn from Zenobia. Before, to obtain a divine sword, one had to pay a great price. Will said that if they fought a monster that was destroying everything around them and a religious organization when they had no weak points, he could defeat them. And also, together with Rosetta, they will cope with a dangerous monster. The guy confirmed his thoughts by saying that they would do it. Rosetta was sad, but agreed. The guy suddenly said that they would be coming back today, which shocked Rosetta even more. Rosetta sadly asked if she was helpful. Will replied that she was wrong, and there was nothing mentioned in that plan. Will said that the students who entered were turning around, so he thought she should have asked him. After all, she and Tina are not yet ready to face really strong enemies, or rather really dangerous ones. Rosetta noticed Will's words about really strong opponents. As Rosetta thought, all their enemies were stronger than her and Tina. She remembered the devil and Tinebris. She lied when she said death wasn't scary. However, fear is a test for each of them. While training, Rosetta constantly compared herself to others, and so her self-confidence disappeared. The girl burst into tears, realizing that she could not justify their hopes. Tina started patting her friend on the shoulder, trying to comfort her. Rosetta started apologizing. Will couldn't believe that Rosetta was so unhappy. And seriously speaking, kindness causes a lot of problems for people, and they become obliged to move mountains, and it is very difficult to realize this. He tried to make Rosetta listen to him. The guy told her that the most important thing was that she didn't give up hope. This shocked the girl very much. The girl immediately began to condemn Will for his words, and Artie didn't even want to talk to him anymore. The guy thought it was better to tell her. Will thought that she had talent, but it seemed like her true strength hadn't fully awakened yet. Of course, Rosetta was afraid of making mistakes, and besides, when the time comes and she has to fight monsters, he will tell her about it. But she is a strong person, even though she is at the very beginning of her journey. He turned to Rosetta again, saying that she herself could become an excellent student. In addition, if Zenobia feels that the strength of his students is different, then they will have to give everyone the same load. Rosetta didn't understand how it happened. The headmistress recommended that Regina take the test. It took her a lot of effort to complete it, but she still got a good result. And yet, out of 10,000, there was one mistake. If she succeeded, then Regina's desire is to become stronger, and Rosetta should just be confident in her abilities. The girl's ears twitched, and she said with full confidence that she would pass the test that Regina took. The guys were delighted with her attitude and said they would definitely help her. She thanked them with a warm smile. Tina said it's more fun with company. Rosetta tried to stop her, but Will interrupted her, saying that in that case she could handle it. Artie thought so too. Finally, a knight appeared in front of her, who wanted to make sure she was ready. Rosetta confidently said that she was ready and asked to take the exam from her. The knight said it looked like she was really prepared. Behind her back, Will said with a grin that she wouldn't have prepared for them. Regina, wearing a mask, turned to Will, thinking that his health would not allow it. He told her in his thoughts that she could have been more patient. Artie addressed Zenobia, saying that she would make sure that there was always tea in her cup today. She thanked her. The Madam Director was already at the table, and Will hoped she wouldn't notice the way Regina was acting. The knight thought that he was afraid, but he replied that someone was so childish at one time that even Zenobia's sword was interrupted by Regina, saying that she would tell the essence of the test and she would explain only once. As she said before, her task is simple. In the dungeon, having reached its very depths, you will need to show all your skills. The girl only now realized that she would go alone. And I realized what the problem was, that the scout's role was to protect Pat, and I decided to go alone. As soon as she gets permission from the teacher, she will immediately go to the dungeon, and already inside this dungeon, she will figure out what to do. The difficulty was that she had never gone so low before, and she would have to try. Lessons had already started, and she decided to rest tomorrow morning. Will thought that she should hurry to the dungeon. The guy asked her to do something, and Regina waited for him to say something. He said he wanted to take custody of his younger sister until the end of the exam. The girls said they still have time. Zenobia got up from her seat, saying that the children had stayed too long at home and they should visit them before leaving. And now that they had time, they could go get ready, and Tina had to go with them. Saria realized that her brother was busy today, and Will himself confirmed this. But he promised that next time he would have to come back in 2 days. Rosetta was apologizing to Rosa. The little girls exchanged glances, and they said that there were no problems, and they had a big deal. Will said that she was already thinking like an adult, and she said that everything was fine. Besides, he and Soraya thought that everything would work out for their brother. The guy was amazed at their trust. In that case, Soraya had to take care of Rose. Renren also wants to stay with Will. The guy agreed. And the teacher said that the dog is popular with children and helps them a lot. The guy immediately praised him. Saria noticed that their teacher's mood had even lifted, but she did not understand what she was talking about. And after a short conversation, they said goodbye. Rosetta asked me to wait for Will, because someone was there. Zenobia looked at the girl and said after a pause that since she was here, they had prepared something. Rosetta frowned. There were various objects on the table, and Rosetta didn't understand what they were. Zenobia thought they were needed to explore the dungeon. It will take a long time to get to the right place. There would be no shops to buy everything, and she had to choose the most necessary things. Tina and Rosetta had to choose everything wisely. Tina informed me that she was done with the selection, and Rosetta asked me to wait a bit. Zenobia reassured the girl, saying that there was still time. She was choosing between magic torches and a spare bow and arrow. That's why she asked me to wait again. But now they were already near the dungeon with different dragons. Some guy contacted Zenobia, saying that they would be happy to help at any time. She replied that they were always at her fingertips. Will was amazed at the beauty of the building, and there are couples who will go together, namely Tina and Rosetta and Artie and Will. The guy looked at the approaching dragon and wanted to fly on it. He allowed it, and Will thanked him. The guy had already sat on the dragon and was offering his hand to Artie, who said it was ugly. The girl sat behind Will and hugged him. A blush of embarrassment already appeared on her face. Artie wanted to say something, but immediately asked him to forget it. As a child, Mrs. Director used to ride her on a horse, and Will started laughing because he had already imagined this picture. Suddenly, a strong wind blew across the girl's face, and Will shouted at her to hold on. In the sky, two large dragons could be seen flying into the distance.